Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the second part of the GFC meeting. And this part will cover the identified global good practices. I would like to introduce Mr. Vladimir Radunovic, who is the Director of Cybersecurity and E-Diplomacy Programs of Diplo Foundation. He has led the team of experts and researchers of Diplo Foundation who have assisted the GFC initiatives to prepare the collection of global good practices. In response to the GFC roadmap that had defined 2 documents to be prepared and presented at the GCCS 2017, as building blocks of the longer-term strategy of GFC, number 1, a global agenda for cyber capacity building, which identifies future priorities, and a set of global good practices on a variety of cyber topics. The Diplo Foundation was asked to facilitate the process after the annual conference of GFC in Brussels in June this year. Through a fairly comprehensive process, the global good practices were identified by the global initiatives, shared for feedback with the GFC community, and were finally presented in a comprehensive document as a collection of the GGPs. Mr. Radunovic will tell us a bit about the process and its highlights, and we will then get to know more about identified global good practices from 5 different initiatives. Mr. Vladimir Radunovic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone, I would say, in my time zone. I'm still not adapted to this time zone, as you could probably see. We're moving to a different part of work of the GFC. So if previously we have been discussing what should be done in future, now we're discussing how should it be done. It's in order to also show that besides the talk, GFC also has some very practical results. And we'll see them today. We'll try to make the part after I finish with my monologue more interactive or more dynamic, as we're going to hear some of the highlights of the global good practices. Some of the questions that we wanted to answer with the global good practices is, as I said, how do we do capacity building? Okay, we should do combating cybercrime. We should increase the use of standards, but how do we actually do that? How do we make sure that we know which standards we are not following? How do we actually build capacities of law enforcement agencies and judicial institutions? What are some of the good approaches to do that? Then, if we are looking at all the vulnerabilities in the network, how do we know how do we know to find the vulnerabilities in the network which are reliable, and how do we mitigate them? And many practical and policy questions which are hanging out there when we are discussing capacity building and what we are going to do. So this is what was one of the goals of the work on global good practices. Now, before we start discussing global good practices, how do we define them? What are the global good practices? Almost anything that we do is a practice. It needs to be a global, so it needs to be replicable, or at least that someone else can join the efforts. That's what is global. It needs to be good. How do we know what is good? Well, that's quite tricky. If we don't go into assessment, then political processes are hard to assess. Then we have to see what are the examples of capacity building done in cyber field, in non-cyber field, in development field. What are some of the good approaches to capacity building that we can say, okay, now we know this practice is a good practice. But what is very interesting is, what is a practice? This is also a very good question. We think, well, it's something that's done, but it should be, in a way, proven by the experts that it works, that it's something that works, that it's something that can be implemented, and that we can call a practice. That's something that's tangible enough that it's not a principle. And that was quite a trick in the whole process, how to distinguish the principles and the practices. The principle is it needs to be a multi-stakeholder process. That's a principle. But the practice is, in order to do it, you have to assemble these and these stakeholders, they should be doing this and this that lasts for that amount of time and so on. Then there was also a question, do we know about bad practices? And that's something that I want to emphasize whenever we talk about good practices, and probably encourage you in future. If we talk about good practices, we should be thinking about what are the bad practices. And there were some initiatives that also raised possible bad practices, what we should not do. We shouldn't be ashamed to say what doesn't work. And then when it comes to capacity building, how does it all fit into capacity building? There are various definitions of capacity building, but in a nutshell, the two that I like, one is from the Swiss SDC, that it is the process of improving the performance of the institution, individual, and so on. And the UNDP says it's a process, note that it's a process again, that maintains the capacities to set and achieve the own development objectives. So it's linked with the development agenda as well. Now, what did we want to do and how did we come up to the global good practices? It came from the roadmap of the GFC, which says we need the agenda to know what we want to do, and we need practices to see how we should do what we want to do. So back in May this year, Diplo was tasked to work with the initiatives of the GFC, trying to recognize what are some of the global good practices that they do, trying to frame them in such a way that people can find them useful. And I want to share results of an exercise we had throughout this process, is which are those people that should know about the good practices, who are we actually targeting? So I'll give you an example. We had a good exercise in The Hague in September, where we tried to see who do we pitch with these exercises and to profile specific persons we want to look at. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples. Bear in mind that those are sort of Europeanized personnels, because we did it in The Hague. But try to copy-paste these persons to your regional environment. The first one is, for instance, an imaginary John, 39 years old, a technical manager coordinator or chief in the internet service provider. He receives a set of global good practices from a board member who attended the GCCS and who told him, take a look at this, there are some things that you might be interested in. He basically is concerned how to mitigate the vulnerabilities in the network of the internet service providers, but he is also keen on how to share this knowledge with other peers from the internet service providers. Anyone of you within the internet service provider? Even if not, you certainly know someone who would benefit from this. The second person is so-called Dr. Sofia. She's an MFA minister of a mid-income developing country. She has 2 kids, teenagers. She follows economic and security aspects of the United Nations and the regional meetings. She finds out about global good practices from the policy briefing. She finds it interesting, even though she probably cannot follow up directly on some of them. But what she finds interesting is that there are the ways for her country to build capacities in law enforcement, as well as to link with the other countries which are working on that, which is their foreign objective. So quite useful for her. And then the third one is Alex, who is the Chief Information Security Officer of a bank in a developing country. The guy has 48 years. He has 2 kids, managing a team of 10 people. He learns from the peer network, from the banks, about some good practices of how to find vulnerabilities in the system, but also how to increase the standards, how to implement the standards in the security of a bank, a regional bank which used to be targeted by cyber attacks. And the fourth one was a foreign or a ministry policy advisor who was at the GCCS, learned about global good practices, and specifically wanted to raise it on a ministerial level, among other ministries, what could be done on a policy level. So those are some of the typical target groups that we might have in mind. And again, even if you cannot recognize yourself in some of those personnels, but I'm sure you can, I'm sure you do have people that you could share the global good practices. Now, what was the process? As I said, we gathered in May, or started working on this in May. And then we had the first meeting with the initiatives in Brussels and with the whole GFC community in Brussels in June during the annual meeting, where we were basically trying to define what we want to do. After that, we had a questionnaire, quite a detailed one with all the initiatives, and they were very hardworking, providing a number of possibilities for good practice or for practices, which then through a set of interviews and back and forth communication, we distilled into practical, tangible exercises, fine-tuning it and sharing with the community in September and October, and coming up to a set of 10 global good practices out of 5 global initiatives of the GFC. Aside from that, 4 of the initiatives managed to also come up with strategic level practices, some sort of maybe less tangible but more overarching practices, including the principles, what should be done when it comes to, for instance, vulnerability disclosure, standards, protection of the critical infrastructure, and so on. What is the result of this exercise? We came up with a document which is about 75 pages long, and I'm sure no one wants to read 75 pages. So that's why we tried to somehow help all of us navigate through this document, because this is essentially a collection of good practices. Each of the practices has only 4 or 5 pages, so it's very readable. We tagged each of the good practices by stakeholder. Who should primarily be interested? Governments, law enforcement, private sector, civil society, CERT community, expert community, academia. So you can easily find yourself out of these stakeholders, say, oh, okay, I'm from law enforcement. Let me see what practices are relevant for me. And then we also tagged each of the practices per topics, thematic areas. So we said incident response, combating cybercrime, standards, cooperation, capacity building. So if you're interested in a particular topic, you can also take a look at the topic and say, aha, okay, these are the practices that I should look at if I'm interested in these topics. The reason why we also use these thematic tags is to link it better with the agenda. So ultimately, you can go to the agenda, look at the topics, what should be done, find the same topics in the GGPs, in the Global Good Practices, and say, okay, this is how it can be done, some of the examples. And an interesting add-on to the Global Good Practices also highlights on capacity building. So while running through the practices, we managed to get into a number of recommendations. I would put them as recommendations, even though we say highlights, how capacity building should be done. And those are some sort of principles, and I encourage you to take a look in the document. Now, before I move to actually this dynamic part, where we are going to hear some of the pitches of the best practices, or global good practices, how can you learn more? Firstly, go to the GFC website, and we'll have the link afterwards. And you can download either the full document, which I definitely encourage you to do and share it further, even though it has 75 pages, but you can skip some pieces if you wish. Or also on the GFC website, you can easily find the practice that you want to look, and just browse into 3 or 4 pages of that. Why? To find if it's useful to you, to think about if there is anyone, any Alex or Sophia or John or anyone else who might benefit from that, from bank, government, or ISP or anyone else. And then also to get engaged with the GFC more. Because what we do expect and we hope is that you can either benefit from the GGPs we saw there, you can maybe replicate some of them or join them, or you can share your own experiences for the next rounds of the GGPs, and that would be really much appreciated to share because the GFC is basically a platform for sharing the knowledge and sharing the experience. I think I'll stop there, and we can move to the pitches. Now, we have 5 practical GGPs and 1 more strategic GGP that we are going to present today. Since it's quite an amount of pages and work in all of that, we kindly asked all of our representatives here to try to do a pitch of 3 minutes, to try to persuade you, to get your attention, to read their pages in the document, to find out more about them and hopefully approach them and say, we want to share this, we want to join this, we want to replicate, we want to learn more. We have something to share with you. So ask the representatives or the presenters listed over here to take the floor, please. I'll go one by one as I read, and then I think you can already take the floor and take the seat here. We'll hear from Alexander Seger from Council of Europe about the experience on capacity development of law enforcement institutions when it comes to using a specific approach of regional hubs. Then we'll hear from Monsieur Ito from Cyber Green Initiative about health metrics. How do we make sure that we know what are the vulnerabilities, that we have solid data and we know how to mitigate it and share? Then we'll hear from Caroline from the Oxford Center on maturity model, a specific way to assess the capacities for cybersecurity in your country, one of the models that exist. Thomas from the Netherlands will help us understand what is or show the practical tool that can help us understand what are the standards, security standards we might be missing in our system. Carrie-Anne will help us with specific campaigns on cybersecurity awareness raising. I'm sure all of you have been thinking about raising awareness, but how do we do it in the best way? And last but not the least, one of those strategic global good practices, Petra will tell us about some practices when it comes to critical information infrastructure protection. I will try to be fair to all of you and interrupt you after 3 minutes. Well, at least give a signal that we've gone through. So try to keep within time. Alex, you want to start first?
Thank you. About 30 years ago, I was computerizing the UN in Vienna. And in the run-up to the UN Crime Congress in Cuba in 1990, I was asked to give some inputs. So in the, I guess it's called Havana Declaration from 1990, you already find a reference to the need for technical assistance regarding crimes against computers. So the idea of technical assistance is not new, but nothing happened much for the next 15 years or so. In 2006, when we started seriously, by the time I was at the Council of Europe, to deal with capacity building on cybercrime, we were very much alone. And then Microsoft joined us, public-private, very good, and then other governments and others joined us. And I'm very happy that today, capacity building on cyber security, cybercrime, is mainstreamed. It's also mainstreamed in technical assistance. So it has taken a long time, almost 30 years, but I think we have made huge progress. Capacity building, as you know, is supporting a process of change. You have a situation A, you want to go to a situation B, or a government or an institution want to go to situation B, and capacity building is to support this process of change. I would even say capacity building is masterminding a process of change. Very important. So there are several ingredients that are needed or practices that have come up, and that I want to present one or two of them here from the Council of Europe experience dealing with cybercrime as a matter of criminal justice. An important thing we need is commitment. For us, Council of Europe, we focus on those countries that are committed to implement the Budapest Convention, so that we can select among the 200 or so countries. We select those that are committed to join the Budapest Convention. We focus our resources on those countries. And then we need commitment. We have commitment, but we also need ownership. And for the ownership, what we developed over the last 10 years or so is in each country that we work, we ask the government to establish a country project team. You find one of the good practices are the country project teams. So we have in about 25, 30 countries that we work, we have in each country team representing the cybercrime unit, representing a prosecution service, representing the Ministry of Justice, police training academies, judicial training academies, and so on. So in each country we have 5, 6, 7, sometimes thirds are also involved, 5, 6, 7 country team, institutions in a country team. So if we have a project like the Global Action on Cybercrime extended with about 10 priority countries, we can work already with about 50 to 70 institutions at the same time and move in a coherent way in a similar direction. Take an example from the region, Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka joined the Budapest Convention about 3-4 years ago, and we have now a country team there. We trained 2 years ago under Glazy 10, 20 police officers, and they then trained another 600 police officers. We trained a few judges as trainers, and they train now through the judicial training institution there hundreds of other judges. This is the approach. And now, and this is the other good practice here, is we take this a step further. Having worked with Senegal in West Africa, Morocco in North Africa, Mauritius in Southern Africa, Sri Lanka, Philippines, and so on, we now work with these countries as hubs, as regional hubs. So through Sri Lanka, we work with countries of South Asia. Nepal, recently we had an event there, and so forth. With Senegal, we work in West Africa. With Mauritius, we work in East Africa. So these countries not only have taken the ownership by having these country teams, but they also take ownership to transmit and share their experience in their respective regions. This is what I had to tell.
Thank you, Alex. Short and sweet. If you want to know more about it, of course, approach Alex, or download the document and simply search for #regional tabs. That's short name for this practice. And then you also see next to it their practice about national teams, what Alex also mentioned. Okay, moving on to Yuri. Yuri, your 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me to speak with you. I love pitching, so it's great. Today I'll be presenting on producing and presenting trusted metrics on cyber health, cyber ecosystem health. First and foremost, the most important thing. First and foremost, the prevention of cyber incident is contingent on the healthy cyber ecosystem. The internet is currently infected by many types of cyber diseases, such as bot and malware infections. Even worse, this number is increasing because of the vulnerabilities that exist due to misconfiguration, system outdatedness, and inadequate risk mitigation and preventions. So resulting systemic risk conditions are susceptible the resulting system risk conditions are susceptible of becoming catalyst of staging cyber attacks on others, including those within your ecosystem. So how can we efficiently and effectively improving our cyber ecosystem health? The first steps to improving the cyber ecosystem health are understanding the cause of conditions that pose risks to the internet, and then accurately measuring those systemic risks, and providing metrics in order to focus mitigations and cleanup efforts. Existing cybersecurity practice focusing on a minimally processed raw data is useless to anyone but a particular niche of technical operators. Highly quality and more actionable data should be turned into metrics and made digestible to a broader audience, including policymakers. What do these metrics ultimately do? They allow for prioritization. They can assist CERTs in communicating with partners and providing a trust picture on the conditions of their networks. And operators and companies can enhance their skills for understanding and prioritizing risks. These metrics can also help decision makers in corporation assess risks and gather resource for mitigation. There are 3 questions that most of the serious the chief security officer asks. 1, are we managing risks? 2, are we better off than we were last month? 3, how do we compare with other competitors? Metrics should help answering those questions to support their decision making. Most importantly, metrics allow for common, simple language to be spoken about the technical topics that might be otherwise difficult to grasp for policymakers and decision makers. The existing implementation of this practice is cybergreen metrics. Our statistics metrics features metrics-based measurement and visualization, as well as the ability to compare across countries and autonomous systems. How can you implement this practice? Cybergreen is actually seeking for local partners to be the local hub of its constituents for more localized metrics. Similar to the way that WHO World Health Organization is working with the CDCs, and the CDC work with the local clinics in public healthcare. Local partners such as internet service providers and CERTs, IRIs, can help with understanding local factors and feed them into the normalization method. So Cybergreen can provide support on how to set up local centers of the cybersecurity, cyber health, with a data, statistics platform, visualizations, and health state analysis report. Reach out to me and let's start developing cyber health metrics and the Center of Cyber Ecosystem Health together.
Thank you, Yuri. So if you don't know how to wrap the complicated data into metrics or the report of where are the vulnerabilities, that's the way to go. Again, you can browse to the document for health metrics and other two good practices of Cybergreen, or you can simply Google Cybergreen and you'll get to Yuri or catch her somewhere in the corridors. Okay, Caroline, the maturity model.
Okay, so we heard a lot about how important cybersecurity capacity building is on a national level, what it means, what are the priorities, but how now on a very practical level, how to know what cybersecurity capacity building is needed on a national level, how to set priorities, which priorities should be set, and where to invest. So these are questions which the maturity model can help to assess cybersecurity capacity maturity and to identify gaps, but also to identify where countries may be strong and maybe also can be maybe even a leader in this field. So the cybersecurity capacity maturity model for nations, short CMM, which I present as a best practice in itself, but also it includes a lot of good practices. Looks at a very broad spectrum of issues regarding cybersecurity capacity. And we're talking about 5 dimensions: a cybersecurity policy and strategy, cyber culture and society, cybersecurity training, education and skills, legal and regulatory frameworks, and standards, organizations, and technologies. So using this model, deploying this model in a country can help the government, but also other stakeholders to better understand the maturity, cybersecurity maturity in a country, and to understand the priorities. Each of these dimensions includes factors and aspects, which kind of like makes it a bit more concise. And for all of these aspects, there are indicators which define 5 stages of maturity, starting with startup, formative, established, strategic, and dynamic. And at the end, country knows, okay, where it has to improve. It's not a ranking, it's really for decision making. It's not comparing one country with the other, and really give something into your hand, in the government's hand to show around. The methodology to deploy the CM is also I think is a good practice, because it brings together in 3 days stakeholders from different stakeholder classes from all, like government, policymakers, law enforcement, CSIRTs, civil society, international organizations, etc., who come together in focus group discussions to talk about those different dimensions and the underlying aspects. It's also always can become a very fruitful exercise for all stakeholders in the country to better understand cybersecurity capacity maturity and to make the right decisions. And so this is like also sharing of knowledge between stakeholder groups, and it's deployable in every country, possible country. What is also good practice in this context is that this model is deployed with international and regional partners. The Organization of American States use it for regional study, and they're planning to do a second round. We're working with the World Bank. We are kind of like also coordinating with different players. Want to do assessment in several same countries. We kind of flag if there are kind of duplication. I think that's one of the most important things, which I wasn't mentioned yet, there's the challenge of duplication of efforts. And yes, I think beyond the 3 minutes. There are some of our partners here in the room even. A couple of my colleagues are around today and the next days, and yeah, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. Can I refer to the...
That's okay.
We also have the cybersecurity capacity portal. It's very easy to find on Google, where you can find this model. It's a public source. There are also some of the reports which are public, so encouraged to share those reports. We have done 20 so far. I think about 10 are published, as well as a study from the US. And the cybersecurity capacity portal shows our work, but also the work of, I think, most of the players who are in the room and much more. And we also work with the GFC on an inventory of regional and global capacity building initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. So if you're going into capacity building for your country, make sure that before that you do the assessment, what you already have. And one of the ways to do that is the maturity model. Okay, moving on to a very practical tool for making sure that you actually adhere to standards, which are many. But are you actually implementing them? Thomas.
Yes, thank you, Vlad. Our best practice, good practice, is in conjunction with using cybersecurity standards. One of the parts which are defined in the global agenda. Next slide, please. Yes, the standards we are talking about, on which I'm going to talk about the testing tool, testing these standards, are basically 3 main features which we test. That is the internet connection, email security, to try to avoid phishing, spam, and all other kind of nefarious things. And it's the security of the website. Is the website secure? Is it authentic? Is it the website it says it is? And also, is the website encrypted from A to B, let's say, between the user and the website itself? So these standards are basically improving cybersecurity. And they're improving it on a global perspective. These standards have been developed by the IETF, Internet Standards. They have a very global perspective. Practically, I think everybody of you is using email, is using browsers to get to websites. So if we can do anything at all to improve the security, probably the whole humanity will benefit from this. So just going back one, please. Yes, and it's very important to notice that implementing these standards has to be done also by a variety of players. And not only ISPs, who are responsible for the internet connection, but practically every organization, government, business who is communicating with citizens, users, whatever, because they provide a website, they provide some kind of authentication and, let's say, features in the website to interact with an organization, but also they are emailing to users. Next slide, please. So one of the global good practices from this initiative is using a testing tool which looks at the performance of a website, a domain used for either a website, either email. It's also used to test whether your connection is secure. If you go to internet.nl, it's globally applicable. There is an English version of this. For example, you can, and I have made this example to get the gfce.com through the test, which is the next slide. Next slide, please. And well, not without any surprise, but it's 100% compliant. But it's so what is basically the use? Let's say what is the benefit of this testing tool? It's not only for let's say to use by technicians or by people in organizations to test whether they are compliant, and if they are not compliant, they can go to the website. They can. In the Dutch model, we have people from various Dutch internet organizations working on a non-profit basis to help organizations to implement these standards. But it's much more than a testing tool. It's also, and I think I refer also to Yuria, this is about transparency. This is about making transparent what the performance is from basically not an organization, but a complete sector. You can also measure, theoretically, a complete nation, whether it complies to certain, let's say, up-to-date standards like this one. So it's not only a testing tool, but we use it also to generate reports. Reports for, in the Dutch situation, all ICT providers who have been together in association, they have been used this. Oh, sorry. They have also used this. One very good example is in the Dutch case, municipalities. There was one reporter who used this test tool to measure 50 major municipalities. It was lousy, to be honest. It has driven our Minister of Interior Affairs to talk with government agencies, municipalities, and we see now, after a year, that email, in this case it was email security, has improved very much. So you can use it for peer pressure, you can use it for performance measurement, and it's very scalable. We have a project now deriving from this testing tool and other global practices to enter into a project of 2 years in which we will globally try to expand the use of this testing tool and also to have all kinds of other, let's say, technical and other training sessions, not only for awareness, but also for real implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. So if you haven't tried your websites and emails yet, to see how you are standing with standards, do it as soon as possible. But you can also find out how to use this practice more widely, as Thomas mentioned, if you go to the document of global good practices. Carry on. Moving on to raising awareness. This is one of the ways to raise awareness, but there is much more on the campaigns. Carry on.
It's a picture of a world where all our citizens are aware. That's the kind of the pitch that I was to start with. I'll step away from that and be a little bit more formal. So our best practice was focus on awareness through a Cyber Awareness Month. And this initiative is with the OAS, the US, and Canada. And what is it? It's a month dedicated to cybersecurity topic, where the goal is to actually mobilize all the actors within a country to actually focus on cybersecurity awareness initiatives, activities, and to actually raise the level of awareness among citizens, especially, and all the stakeholders. What the practice has been is that once we've decided on the month, a theme is actually dedicated to each week. And within that week and each theme, we actually center a lot of activities around the theme, whether it be online, whether it be through Twitter, whether it be through webinars. We try to focus it that way. What's the value added? It actually allows all the actors to be engaged. It allows persons within schools, private sector, civil society, everyone to actually be part of the process. And it allows stakeholders to share and leverage resources. So we wanted to give you an example of what Cyber Awareness Month 2017 looked like for the OAS, the US, and Canada. So first of all, we actually decided to make it be a joint effort. So it was a series of coordinated events leading up to October, which was Cyber Awareness Month. So for example, we actually had a regional launch in Uruguay, actually preempting the month to begin. We also had a series of social media campaigns that was actually pushed through the National Cybersecurity Alliance, which is US-based. And during that time, we had a coordinated social media plan. So all the actors, we were in a series of meetings for months, actually coming up with a global agenda. And October this year in DC, we had the global launch of Cyber Awareness Month. What made it global is that we tried to have on the agenda a wide variety of persons speaking. And we were actually able to secure someone from the African Union. We had someone from the White House speaking. We had some of our member states coming across. We have a minister from Guatemala who was able to actually participate and speak as well. The cool thing about the month was that we actually had a social media room. So we're actually doing Facebook Live interviews at the same time. We had multiple persons Twittering. We had predetermined tweets that were to go out on each panels. We also had in the morning a media panel where we actually invited the media to a room and tried to educate the media about Cyber Awareness Month. Another thing that we did is the day before the global launch, we invited civil society for a roundtable discussion to raise the awareness with civil society on what cybersecurity is and the need to actually have a month dedicated to it. So aside from the launch, throughout the month we had a series of activities, and some of them involved Facebook Live interviews around the topics. Like one of the themes was dedicated to actually having a cybersecurity career. And we had persons who were speaking about how they actually started their career in cybersecurity. So from our end, we're hoping that we could pitch that persons throughout the region, India and other regions represented here, would start to think about cyber awareness by having a dedicated month. We would actually call it #Cyber Month. And we actually had #CyberAware, and we had dedicated tweets that you could actually follow from year on year to see how the movement is actually growing. Thank you.
Thank you. So out of 12 months, you can devote one at least to raising awareness about cyber security. And if you do that, there are some tips and tricks they can share. Petra, at the end, when it comes to the critical information infrastructure? Sure.
Yes, critical information infrastructure protection, CIIP in short, forms the link between cybersecurity and national security. CIIP is about the elements of cyberspace that create a risk to a nation. When these elements fail, they have a significant impact on the economy, but also on the society. CIIP includes all activities that aim to ensure critical elements of cyberspace, but also to deter threats, and also to minimize the impact of the incidents. Nations all over the world developed approaches to protect their CIIP. However, there are several basic steps. CIIP starts with the national security perspective and the identification of critical infrastructure in general. Only when those steps are taken, it is possible to identify a nation's critical information infrastructure and develop really a CIIP policy. The dynamic nature of cyberspace makes that nations have to improve their CIIP policy continuously. Critical information infrastructure is often owned by different organizations. The CIIP playing field is complex. So developing a CIIP policy can therefore not be done by governments alone. CIIP activities must be supported by information sharing initiatives. The good practices developing or improving CIIP is a challenge. The Meridian and the GFCE have therefore taken the initiative to develop good practices on CIIP. Based on examples from all over the world, these good practices support development but also implementation of a CIIP policy. There is a large overview of good practices, and I will just highlight a few. So nations have many concerns, but security is priority. CIIP must be made a national security priority. A good practice is therefore to make a CIIP a national security priority. Actually, CIIP is a core element of a national cybersecurity strategy. So the identification of critical information infrastructure is challenging. A good practice is to use definitions from other nations and tailor them to your own country. This helps to avoid time-consuming discussions on the definitions of CI. Also, it is important to involve other stakeholders during development of a CIIP policy. A good practice is to involve stakeholders through exercises. Exercises help to explore the role of different stakeholders in CIIP. So CIIP is complex. This also makes that coordination is necessary for a successful CIIP policy. A good practice is to start a coordinating body for CIIP. An example of a coordinating body is a National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center established in India. This is the national agency of the Indian government for coordinating all activities in respect of critical information infrastructure protection. This agency coordinates with all internal and international stakeholders for protecting the critical information infrastructure of India. So what information infrastructure is critical may change quickly. Technology that is used today is outdated next year. Maintaining insight in trends and technologies is key. So it's a good practice to keep ahead of the CII developments, for example, by expert pools. So these are actually only a few of the good practices collected by the Meridian and the GFCE. CIIP is an important topic within the global agenda, and we look forward to implement the good practices. Thank you.
Thank you. So this was a snapshot of what's in the Global Good Practices collection. Once again, go to the website. Don't make us print everything. We have to be environmentally friendly. So go to the website, browse through, find what's of your interest. Try to get engaged. Contact the people. Share with them your thoughts. Share with them your practices. Ask them if you need any advice. Join them in their efforts within the GFC. And at the end, I really want to thank all of the initiatives, not only you, but your teams as well, and the GFC community. It was amazing, comprehensive, and very inspiring process of coming to at least these number of global good practices, and I'm sure that there is a lot of space to continue with that, as the GFC will most likely get more and more initiatives, as the current initiatives will have more and more good practices. There is a lot of space to continue this. There can be some improvements in the whole process in getting into more tangible practices, but there is a lot of space to continue, and I hope to see, well, all of us in this next steps of the process. And I'll close on that and leave it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir, and thanks to the panel for an excellent set of presentations. Distinguished guests and participants, I think on behalf of India and as co-chair, it's my pleasure to make a few closing remarks now. While clearly this is a very young organization, GFC, I think it's very interesting and very exciting to see the kind of participation that we have been able to bring together, the depth of expertise and the diversity of participants who were there on both the panels. I think we all have very diverse perspectives. We have very diverse experiences. We have different ecosystems that we are dealing with. But we are clearly united in our common mission of ensuring security and resilience of the global cyberspace. Today, I think we've had some very interesting sessions. Mr. David's presentation on the global agenda on cyber capacity building had spelled out the objectives, the process that was followed, consultation and discussions with the entire community. I think there is now need to also prepare a further action plan to implement the global agenda that has been developed. The first panel had highlighted some very important aspects. One, that cyberspace is clearly a great enabler for governments and businesses. It serves as an excellent integrator for society at a global level. No single government or no company, no single organization has the capacity or the resources to take care of the global challenges. The medium itself transcends all kinds of boundaries, and we need partnerships to be able to deal with the challenges as well as the opportunities that this presents. In India, we are painfully aware of the need to first get everyone to participate in cyberspace. We still have a significant part of the population which is not adequately connected with the internet. So is the case with many of the developing countries. So this is also a point which I think had come out. And also, as we spread the access to internet, the need to keep it extremely secure and safe, not just for the adults, but even for children, so that we keep trust alive in the entire framework of ICT and cyberspace. One of the areas that was identified was the capacity building requirement for law enforcement agencies and the judiciary. Currently, the people engaging in cybercrime are doing so quite confidently. The prosecution, and especially successful prosecution, is still eluding us in most of the geographies. The need to actually build capacity in that area is extremely important. As we expand our cyberspace, as we expand our reach, the recourse to cybercrime is also increasing, and it's increasing quite significantly. So we need a coordinated kind of a response there, and possibly GFCE can play a role in building capacities in this area. Another very interesting point that had come out clearly was the concept of cybersecurity by design. That even as we design new products and new services, the elements of cybersecurity need to be inbuilt. They need to be there as a matter of design. We are leaving far too many things on to the reaction to something that happens, and that is far costlier than building it each and every time into the design itself in the requirements and design phase. That will turn out to be the most sustainable and the most cost-effective model. Looking at the way forward, I think we do need to request the GFC members and stakeholders to participate actively in development of the action plan for implementing the global agenda for cyber capacity building. We also need greater participation in coming out with new initiatives, in actually participating in building capacities and sharing knowledge, expertise, and the best practices. The identified good practices are extremely interesting, and I think they are very, very useful for a much wider community. We need to supplement these with relevant tools and implementation guidelines so that they become easy to replicate and deploy, and we have to think through how to garner the resources that will be needed for a much wider replication, dissemination, and use of the good practices. For new and emerging technologies, once again, there is need to understand both the challenges and the opportunities. As the challenges unfold, it is capacity building which can help us convert these challenges into opportunities. And in areas like IoT, blockchain, artificial intelligence, even as the action is unfolding, I think we should start being active and not just reactive to these. Another aspect which I have observed is that while 4 major themes were identified by GFC for initial focus, most of the current GFC initiatives have been on cybersecurity and to some extent on cybercrime. The themes of e-governance and data protection that were initially identified also need attention. It would be great if members, both from countries and intergovernment organizations, from companies, come out with initiatives to activate the remaining 2 thematic areas as well. From India, I'm sure we would like to share a number of experiences we have had in, for instance, in building our identity database Aadhaar and making it a great tool for provision of all kinds of services and taking the benefits of many of our government programs with the help of something which was not initially intended for that purpose. And finally, I would like to thank my co-chair for having given great leadership to the entire initiative. Sitting here in India, I have been able to contribute only to a much lower extent, but Ms. Carmen Gonsalves has put in tremendous amount of effort in stitching the entire organization and stitching all these initiatives together. My great appreciation and thanks also to the GFC Secretariat, which it's difficult to believe that it is just a 4-member secretariat that has actually in a short time put so many initiatives and so many of the good practices together and worked hard to bring everyone onto the platform. From just 42 members that we started with, it's great to see that we have grown to 63 members already. So my appreciation once again, I think we should provide some applause for both the co-chair and the secretariat. Also my thanks to the speakers, the panelists, and the presenters, and also the delegates who are here. And once again, before I close, I would like to once again extend a very warm welcome to you. I hope you stay on and be a part of GCCS 2017. Thank you.
Dear Mr. Secretary, dear GCC community in the room, first of all, I would like to thank you all for your presence and contribution today. Would like to thank, of course, also on my behalf all the speakers, panelists, moderators who exchanged their wealth of experience and sharp insight with us. There's little I can add to the excellent recap of the day provided by Mr. Jay Shawnee. But what I can just, off the top of my head, there are just a few things that spring to my mind that are worth sharing on top of that, because it was a rich day and a lot of a rich discussion and definitely a lot of takeaways that struck me as very helpful. A couple of these takeaways are, for example, and this was also already mentioned by Sani, the importance of developing toolkits to facilitate further implementation of good practices and guidelines identified within the GFCE, toolkits for universal use, of course. The second place, the need to develop a proper, sound methodological tool to assess, evaluate the impact of capacity building endeavors. I think that's indeed a very good piece of advice. That, by the way, also brings in another good insight that was shared with us during the very end of the discussion about international cooperation in capacity building, when we asked about where should the GFCE be in a couple of years' time. And then there was the very understandable and relevant call for more concrete results and more hard evidence of all the benefits of what we're doing here. That's of course always the ultimate challenge, that when we develop good practices and implement very useful projects, that we have to ensure that these takeaways, the assessment of the results, is as tangible as possible, because this again will help us to increase awareness about the importance of capacity building and the need for the appropriate resources even more. And this need is there. That's also one of the reasons, of course, that we're here as a GFCE community, here during the important global conference on cyberspace, where there are lots of political decision makers. So that's our tasking for this week, to ensure that all these political and high-level decision makers around go home convinced about the need for capacity building and more resources for capacity building. So take that as a personal assignment this week, please. It's for all of us. Because indeed, there are already some very encouraging examples lately of good practices that can help you to increase budgets. The Cyber Ambassador of Australia recalled that when he was developing, or by developing an international engagement strategy, he was able to up resources considerably. So that's also a very good piece of advice. I would like to end my short recap here. There's one interesting element that I forgot to mention. I'm sorry, I will do that now. There was also the suggestion, a very helpful suggestion, that we should somehow organize in a more structural manner within the GFCE the sharing of experiences with capacity building and the implementation of projects. So we're also going to look into that. This all being said, this brings me to the following, that, and this has already been mentioned today, in the next 2 days we hope to wrap up work on the communique on the agenda, on the global agenda for capacity building. This communique is a cogent, relatively short text that will provide us with a recap of our capacity building priorities and the underpinning guidelines and principles, and that will provide us with the necessary guidelines and guidance to implement this ambitious capacity building agenda. So I would like to thank all of you, GFCE community, who have helped us draw up that communique, which hopefully will see the light, or I'm pretty sure it will, on Friday during the afternoon. I think it's at 1:30 that we're going to present the communique. So please come and be there. This is an important moment, milestone for the GFCE. Before wrapping up, I would first of all like to wholeheartedly thank my co-chair, Mr. Secretary Ajay Sahani, who has not only been a generous host to all of us today, but also contributed and contributes a lot in a wealth of experience and insights to the GFCE. I think the GFCE has been enriched since we have taken you, since we have embraced you as our co-chair, India, during our annual meeting earlier this year. That was definitely a decisive step forward for the platform. I would like to thank your team as well, of course, wonderful supporting team. Many of them are in the room. I would also like to join in your praises, of course, for the GFCE Secretariat, David, Mario, Wouter, Manon, and Diana for organizing this event and the upcoming GCCS session on Friday. And I would, of course, not like to leave this room without thanking you, dear audience, GFCE community. And I hope to see you after this meeting for a informal cocktail reception here in the Marriott Hotel in the K3 courtyard. That's opposite the reception desk of the hotel. And I would like to remind you that your GFCE badge will serve as an entrance ticket for the cocktail. So thank you very much. Hope to see you during the cocktail and on Friday when we are going to present the brilliant communique. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you all, first of all, for being here. It's a pleasure to see all these people from different regions of the world. I would like to start to introduce both co-chairs of the GFCE. The co-chair of India, Mr. Ajay Sahani, Secretary of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, and the co-chair of the Netherlands, Ms. Carmen Gonsalves, Head of the Task Force International Cyber Policies of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you to New Delhi. New Delhi is a great place to be in, and November we are seeing a very bright and lovely day today. Wonderful beginning to this event, and also a good augur for the GCCS that we will be seeing in a couple of days. It's great to be here as a part of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. This is one of our most important curtain raiser events in the run-up to GCCS 2017. Many of you have come from all over the globe to participate in this. Thank you very much. It's clear that with your commitment, the global agenda on cyber capacity building and around the global good practices that have been carefully identified by the GFCE initiatives, we can achieve tremendous results. Since 2015, GFCE has provided a valuable platform to ensure that all nations can embrace a quickly expanding cyberspace. Within a very short period of 2 years, GFCE has worked hard to determine what kind of cyber capacity needs to be built, how expertise must be nurtured and shared, what action is needed to facilitate this goal. Not only countries, but international organizations and companies have come together to conceptualize global and regional capacity building initiatives to enhance cybersecurity, combat cybercrime, protect data, and promote e-governance. As the roadmap for GFC indicated, GFC is now ready with a global cyber capacity building agenda and identified several global good practices which have come out of the specific initiatives. During the deliberations which were held at the GFC annual meeting, it was recognized that cyberspace is becoming an important point in the political agenda of almost all the countries. Building global cyber capacity will demand concerted efforts from various stakeholders, including the government, industry, and the academia. The government plays a very key role in formulating policies and enables the ecosystem where R&D and entrepreneurship are promoted and skill development in a very large way is facilitated. GFC can play a very important role in terms of coordinating such activities. Cybersecurity has emerged to be the most active among the 4 themes of GFC. It is now at the top of the international agenda, as we have seen high-profile breaches raising fears that cyber risk could endanger the global economy. With massive adoption of digitization, different initiatives like smart cities, the concern on cybersecurity has increased manifold. GFC has emphasized the growing need to prioritize cyber capacity building at strategic and operational levels in cybersecurity. India being no exception to this, we are also concentrating on building capacities to keep our digital world safe and secure. The world of technology, of course, is evolving rapidly. Apart from the threats that are there within the existing technologies, a number of new emerging technologies are taking shape and growing very rapidly. Blockchain, Internet of Things, machine learning, artificial intelligence, a very large growth of data analytics. All of that is happening at an ever-increasing pace. And cybersecurity must keep pace with all of these developments. Going digital can be quite disruptive as well. It can be very productive, but it can also be disruptive. It transforms how individuals interact with one another. And within the society, a number of domains, a number of processes feel the impact of emerging technologies and the growing reach of digital. New business models are emerging. The old ones will wither away as we see new models emerge. In doing so, we find a number of important policy challenges. The challenges transcend privacy, security, consumer policy, competition, innovation, jobs and skills, among many. The failure to address these issues could lead to economic inefficiencies, could lead to reactionary policies, could lead to a worsening of inequalities and a further erosion of the social fabric as well as slower growth. At the same time, the same technologies promise to give us a far, far more prosperous world and promise to be the route for participation of everyone in the benefits that are coming through the cyberspace. In India, we have prided ourselves on having a Digital India program. The vision for the Digital India program is to transform India into a digitally empowered society and a knowledge economy. And it combines with itself initiatives such as Make in India, Startup India, Skill India, digital payments, and making use of the large databases that are getting created to take services conveniently to each and every citizen of the country. In a recent reform, India has also embraced a common goods and services tax, which has created a common national market. And all of this is enabled through very deep and effective use of digital technologies. What we see with these is massive inroads that digital technologies are making. On top of a large identity database that has been created by the country, we are now seeing a mushrooming of digital payments and increasing use of digital methods of transacting businesses, which are leading to a less cash economy. At the same time, these also would end up presenting many challenges as we move aggressively in that space. Addressing many of these concerns, we also have a mushrooming startup sector in the country. India today is considered the third largest in terms of startups in the world, with around 4,750 startup companies making inroads in existing technologies as also in the newer ones. In India, we are very keen to involve industry, and seeing the nature of the cyberspace, it is very clear that cyberspace has to have multiple stakeholders and participation from everyone. It is not just governments, it is the intergovernmental organizations, it is the industry, it is the civil society, academia, R&D, and it is only all of them together that can actually create the tools and mechanisms for us to harness benefits from the emerging technologies. As we move deeper into the cyber space and as cyber technologies become available to more and more, we are also concentrating on developing a large amount of capacity in various forms in the country. In India, we have not just a challenge of growing expertise in among the technology players, but also among the large population that has not yet received digital services. We have a large digital literacy program in which over the next couple of years, we aim to cover as many as 60 million families and help at least one person in each family become digitally literate, make use of digital technologies with confidence. In the area of cyber security, we have a large program on information security, education and awareness, in which more than 100 institutions in the country help us with R&D and with various types of training and academic programs, which includes programs for the law enforcement authorities, the judicial officers, as well as for participants in digital space from the government and from the industry. Apart from the work that is happening in capacity building, we are also significant players in e-governance and are moving now into the data protection, into building our framework for data protection. In this context, I feel that our experience would also be of some benefit while we are building the GFCE capacities and helping strengthen the 4 areas where GFCE is active. I would also take this opportunity to welcome you all to GCCS 2017. The themes this time is Cyber for All. It's a safe, secure, and inclusive cyberspace for sustainable development. The GCCS has emerged as the largest global platform to discuss various issues to optimize the potential of cyberspace for improving the lives of citizens without compromising the larger goal of sustainable development. GCCS 2013 in Seoul put the cyber capacity building prominently on the political agenda as a high priority, and this was acknowledged by all stakeholders. The GCCS 2015 in The Hague provided us a structure for cyber capacity building, taking it to the next level by launching the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. GCCS 2017 is the next important step. This time we have more than 2,500 delegates, and we have delegates who will be here from as many as 136 countries. There are more than 40 sessions on the broad themes of cyber for growth, cyber for digital inclusion, cyber for security, and cyber for diplomacy. In addition to the delegates who will be here, we will have participants from more than 2,000 remotely connected locations. So almost 10,000 delegates are expected to participate in that manner. And this conference offers us a tremendous opportunity to work together to create a safe, secure, and inclusive cyberspace for all. We hope that this meeting will also encourage many more countries and many more stakeholders to contribute to the existing initiatives of the GFCE, also to undertake new initiatives within the framework that has been set up in the area of cyber capacity building, so that we can expand international cooperation and expand the efforts to bring more and more people online safely and securely. Meetings like this will help us all work together to meet the challenges of this new world. Let's use this opportunity to understand the various challenges and how these can be converted into an opportunity for all the participants. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, I'm delighted to be here today sharing this platform, this stage with Mr. Ajay Sahani. That's really a pleasure, to open the meeting of the pre-GCCS meeting of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. To some extent, and although this is my first time in Delhi ever, this feels a bit like homecoming. In 1798, my great-great-great-grandfather, or perhaps another great had to be added, was born in what nowadays is Mumbai. So I have my Indian roots here, and that's why I'm definitely even more happy to be here today. It is a privilege to welcome such wealth of experience and knowledge on cyber capacity building from all over the world to Delhi. The commitment of so many of you shows the importance of cyber capacity building in today's international cyber landscape and the role of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise within the field. The internet is increasingly regarded, and rightly so, as a global commons, because of its quintessential role in supporting all aspects of human endeavor. The Netherlands is committed to keeping the internet free, open, and secure for all. Among other things, this means taking full advantage of all the opportunities ICTs offer our economies and our societies. Access to cyberspace, i.e. the internet, is emerging as a significant driver of economic growth. It is increasingly seen as a major developmental opportunity. At the same time, and we must not forget this important fact, 60% of the world's population is yet to gain access to information and communication technologies. Many of the dividends of the digital revolution thus remain to be realized, particularly in developing countries. Therefore, the theme of the GCCS 2017, Cyber for All, couldn't be more befitting. The ever-expanding cyberspace creates countless new opportunities for individuals, businesses, and governments, but also comes with challenges. Challenges to existing concepts of governance, security, and our way of living. And unfortunately, in this ever more pivotal cyberspace, we are encountering ever more risky and dangerous threats. Threats to its openness, threats to its operations and to its security. Threats that we must fend off as effectively as possible while staunchly protecting our core values and the fundamental rights of our citizens. The internet is by design a cross-border concept with many stakeholders involved. In an international context where cyberspace has become increasingly politicized and cyber operations are used by state actors to pursue political goals, by criminals to seek financial gains, and with private actors and citizens more and more caught in the middle, it is imperative that all stakeholders work together. Governments, businesses, academia, and civil society must all be able to adapt and continually improve their capabilities, exchange information, and cooperate to address any of the associated risks. As Mr. Secretary Saani rightfully noted, cyber capacity building can turn challenges into opportunities. By increasing our knowledge on cybersecurity and developing our collective resilience towards cybersecurity threats, we can enjoy and continue to enjoy an open, free, and secure internet while taking full advantage of the digital revolution. Of course, I realize very well that I'm preaching to the converted here when I say that capacity building programs have the potential to promote comprehensive awareness across government and private sector of cyber-related threats, as well as empower citizens with the knowledge, skills, and sense of shared responsibility to practice safe and informed behavior in the use of ICTs. When together we can achieve that through effective capacity building, that this important global cybersecurity chain is strengthened, we will all come out much stronger and resilient, and that's where this platform, the GFCE, stands for. Initiatives undertaken under the umbrella of the GFCE can, apart from addressing primary cybersecurity, first-line cybersecurity, also promote international stability frameworks for cyberspace based on the application of international law. And in this respect, I would like to refer to an interesting, valuable initiative undertaken recently by the OSCE and Germany, an initiative meant to strengthen the implementation of the confidence-building measures agreed to in the OSCE over the last couple of years. The importance of cyber capacity building has been acknowledged by a host of international organizations and forums. We see the reinforced focus on capacity building clearly reflected in the 2015 report of the UNGGE, for example, and it was very high on the agenda of the UNGGE during its meetings last year. On a regional level, cyber capacity building has become one of the priorities of the European Union, for example. In its joint communication of September 17, the EU announced to further increase capacity building efforts in order to support third countries' ability to address cyber threats. But apart from this example, there are many, many more valuable initiatives undertaken, for example, by the Organization of American States, by the African Union, and by ASEAN. So there is a momentum for capacity building also on a regional level. Over the past 2 years, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise has gradually developed into playing a central role in bringing people involved in capacity building worldwide together. To keep up with developments, with technical developments, and with developments in the threat picture and in developments in the field as such, however, we have to continue to improve ourselves as a community. We need to invest in better coordination of our efforts, and as well as trying to and at the same time maintain the overall picture of what's going on worldwide in the area of capacity building. And for the sake of bringing cyber capacities to a higher level, nations, organizations, and other global communities need to act more coherently and more consistently. The Global Forum on Cyber Expertise recognizes the urgency to strengthen its efforts and to strengthen its contribution to the international cooperation. And it definitely acknowledges that one of the key issues where we can strengthen our efforts is the area of coordination, in order to ensure that our collective efforts are mutually reinforcing and complement each other in the best way possible. So where do we stand today with the GFCE? The GFCE has taken the initiative over the last couple of months as a community to develop an ambitious project, a project that is called the Global Agenda on Cyber Capacity Building. This global agenda identifies priorities for capacity building derived from best practices and lessons already identified by the GFCE, but also elsewhere, by development, security, and technical communities. And this agenda aims to be our guidance, our guidesmen for the next couple of years. And besides drawing up this global agenda, which we hope to endorse during our meetings here in Delhi, we have created or compiled a guide of global good practices with successful policies, practices, ideas developed within this GFCE community over the last 2 years since we came into existence. That exercise has a two-pronged function. On the one hand, the good practices within the GFCE served as the foundation on which the global agenda, which we hope to endorse, could be built. And on the other hand, the identified practices will provide practical guidance when implementing the global agenda in the years to come. This way, best practices and expertise in cyber capacity building are exchanged and multiplied to strengthen this global chain of cybersecurity that we all hope to fortify for the benefit of all the internet and users in the world. During the GCCS this week, the co-chairs of the GFCE will present the Delhi Communique as well, the Delhi Communique on the global agenda for cyber capacity building. This communique has the function, or will have the purpose of being an umbrella for both the global agenda and the guide with good practices, and will provide us with the framework, the guidelines and principles that will foster implementation of this global agenda over the next years. And these principles and guidelines include notions such as ownership, sustainability, inclusive partnerships, and shared responsibility and trust, transparency and accountability, all against the backdrop of our joint endeavor to undertake these efforts within the normative framework that we have created worldwide over the last years. These principles will help us to build partnerships and contribute to mutual confidence in upholding ethical and professional standards in technical assistance and capacity building. And the communique reiterates and consolidates key priority areas for our common quest for capacity building, and combines the role of the GFCE as a knowledge-sharing platform as well as a coordination mechanism. However, defining this global agenda and identifying global good practices is only the beginning. Next year, the global GFCE community will have pretty big tasks on its agenda. It will have to take concrete steps to implement this global agenda and to indeed spread the use of these good practices. Implementing the global agenda and using the good practices will help us to harmonize efforts worldwide in the area of capacity building, and it will hopefully create better understanding of causes, impacts, and threats in cyberspace, as well as in the best ways to mitigate the threats and improve our possibilities to benefit from all the opportunities the internet gives us. And in doing so, we hopefully will be able to contribute to reducing global imbalances in resources, knowledge, and expertise, in bridging this digital divide that we should definitely try to overcome. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope that this will be a solid contribution to a sustainable, open, free, and secure internet. So today we will definitely together, collectively, we'll have to work hard to generate new ideas and consensus about the way we can move the GFCE up to its next level of maturity. I count on you, regardless of the level of maturity in the cyber field you're working in, to actively share in the discussions, to share your ideas and opinion with us in a frank manner, because that will be of great help to realizing a really fruitful meeting. And I thank you all, and I wish you a lot of success in your work today. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. David van Duren, the omnipresent and energetic head of the Secretariat of the GFCE. David, please.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to give you a brief update on the global agenda. It was on cyber capacity building. It was mentioned before. Also, some people ask about where's the latest draft of the global agenda for cyber capacity building and also for the global good practices, where everybody gave input for. We have printed some of the global good practices. They are at the back of the room, but we were not able to do it all. But we have sent the latest version of the global agenda to you, and also the global good practices, and they are all available at the GFC website. So So just you know. The update of the global agenda. In the next 10 minutes, I think I will give a presentation on the global agenda on cyber capacity building. 4 parts. Why a global agenda? I think that's a good question. The process, what is it about, and what's next? So, why a global agenda? I think one of the reasons was, as a GFC community, we included the global agenda for cyber capacity building as one of the deliverables mentioned in the roadmap in 2016. In this roadmap, we made clear that we would have 2 deliverables. That would be the global agenda and the global good practices. And these 2 deliverables, they are the focus and they are central today. Why a global agenda? The global agenda itself, maybe I have to say that it's an instrument and it's not a goal in itself. And it's just like, you probably know that in your, probably you know the process of a national cybersecurity strategy. The process itself is just as important as the outcome, and this is an instrument. So what does this agenda bring us? We hope this agenda will help us to strengthen international cooperation, because let's be clear, the core of the GFC is being an international cooperation platform. The second thing is to develop a more common focus within the GFC, and I think there were a lot of members for the recent 2 years have asked what can we do to have more focus within GFC, and this is one instrument for it. And the third thing is to make more efficient use of available resources. As the GFC is about cyber capacity building, we all know that resources are scarce. So hopefully, to have more focus with each other, we can find each other and make more efficient use of available resources we have. The next slide, it's about the road towards the global agenda for cyber capacity building. Like I said, it was announced in 2016 already, and we started this process 9 months ago in March. We started with some desk research. We analyzed like 72 strategies, national cybersecurity strategies, a lot of important international documents on cyber, and we came up with a first outline on what seemed to be important topics. So this was actually the first part. TNO, I don't know if they are here, yes, in front, the Charda and Annemarie and the Charda Krabbendam. They were asked in this whole process to facilitate. So you've been in touch with them many times. So we brought this first outcome of the desk research into our GFC annual meeting in Brussels at the end of May to see what are the priorities. If we analyze all these strategies, what do the GFC community think of? What's important? What are the important topics for cyber capacity building? So in the summer, between June and September, we did a lot of interviews, consultations, interviews with GFCE members, a lot by calls, international calls. And we asked to reflect on the first outlines, and we produced a first draft. This draft was discussed in September during a meeting in September, where GFC members from all over the globe came to The Hague to discuss this first draft of the strategy. And I think two conclusions were important at that time. One was we should have a more formal document announcing this global agenda for the GCCS. So the idea of the Delhi communique came up, and we started that. So this was a spring-off of this September meeting. The second conclusion was that this global agenda should also include an action plan in the end, but it was too early, and we needed more discussions and a more process in depth with the GFC community to be able to have a real good action plan. So that's why we said, okay, this global agenda at this point what we will deliver to the GCCS will be about the scope and the priorities of the GFC community. In September, November, we had a second draft, and so we got a lot of input and feedback from GFC members on that. And in the end, this week, we hope to present a final version of the Delhi communique to the GCCS community this Friday, and we have a latest version for the global agenda, and that's available, like I said, on the website right now. So, two questions left. One thing is, what is this global agenda about? It consists of 3 parts. The first part is about principles. These principles were derived from the already existing Busan principles for effective development cooperation. And what we did was to translate these into the cyber capacity building context. The second part of the strategy are themes and topics, and they are the most important part, I think. What we after these consultations, we had 5 general themes as core of this global agenda on for cyber capacity building, and probably these themes are recognized because they also overlap with already existing frameworks like exist around the globe. The first theme is cybersecurity policy and strategy. The second theme is incident management and infrastructure protection. The third is cybercrime. Fourth is cybersecurity culture and skills, and cybersecurity standards. And these themes are comprehensive. You see them also in existing frameworks, in national strategies, etc. And the third part of the global agenda, and I think that's an important one, is an annex with good practices that we will discuss later today. Okay, and now for the next steps. The global agenda for cyber capacity building, I think, sets the priorities for the GFC community on cyber capacity building. But like I mentioned, it doesn't contain an action plan yet. And after the GFC community will start drafting an action plan for the implementation of the global agenda. Specific attention will be paid, if we talk about an action plan, about securing funding, improving knowledge, bringing in information, sharing good practices, and having expertise available, building a pool of expertise. The objective is to present and to finish this action plan at the 2018 annual meeting that will take place in June 2018 and will be included in the global agenda for cyber capacity building. So the global agenda, like we have right now, will serve as a starting point towards implementation. At this point, it's a living document because we want to include also this action plan, and for the next half a year, things can happen, so we have to be practical. And like Carmen did already, I will call upon the GFC community to mobilize, to put in effort, to be involved in this action plan, because I think this is what is really important. This is about cyber capacity building and what we are going to do with each other. Thank you. So now I would like to introduce the panel to the stage. The panel International Cooperation Cyber Capacity Building. Panelists with different backgrounds, regional organizations, private organizations, countries, partner organizations. I would like to invite to the stage the moderator, Mrs. Carrie-Ann Barrett. She's from the Organization of American States. And I would like to invite the panelists, Mr. William Saito from Japan, Mrs. Kaya Siklic from Microsoft, Mr. Silviano Schlickman from Interpol, Mr. Tobias Viking from Australia, Mr. Patrick Pavlek from the GFC Advisory Board, and Ms. Kate Gitau from Kenya. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Keep coming in. It seems as if I got the short straw, so I'll be, oh, there we go. All right, hi everyone. Thank you, David, for the introduction. Today we have a very impressive panel. The idea of this panel is to actually give you perspectives on global best practices in cyber capacity building. As David introduced, I have to my left Mr. William Saito. He is named by Nike as one of the 100 most influential people in Japan. He began his software programming from the age of elementary school and started his own company while still in high school. By the time he was named Entrepreneur of the Year in 1998, and he's still recognized as one of the leading authorities in cybersecurity. We also have Ms. Kaya. Kaya is the Director of Government Cybersecurity Policy and Strategy of Microsoft. As part of the Government Security and Policy team, she focuses on driving strategic change both within Microsoft and externally to advance cybersecurity and resiliency. We have with us Ambassador Tobias Viking from Australia. Dr. Viking is Australia's inaugural Ambassador for Cyber Affairs. He leads Australia's whole-of-government international engagement to advance and protect Australia's national cybersecurity, foreign policy, economic and trade, and development interests in internet and cyberspace. We also have Mr. Silvino, who's from Interpol, who's a cyber forensic expert from the Brazilian Federal Police. He's also the head of the forensic laboratories, and he's been working at Interpol since 2014 as Interpol's cybercrime director. We have Patrick. Patrick works with the EU ISS. In his capacity, he maintains and develops relations with other Brussels-based institutions. In addition, he's charged with the cyber portfolio, leading the Institute's cyber-related projects and contributing to its outreach activities. Last but not least, we have Dr. Catherine. Catherine is, I think, renowned in her field. She serves as the government of Kenya as the ICT secretary in the State of Department of Broadcasting and Telecommunications. Since 2014, she's been a very active member of the UNGGE in the field of security in the context of information and technology. In this context, she has presented various papers at meetings in the domain of cybersecurity and diplomacy. Ladies and gentlemen, we're hoping that this panel would actually open your appetite towards what the GFC is trying to achieve. We'll be asking each of our panelists to give us just a brief 5-minute overview as to what they believe from their various regions and organizations as to best practice in cyber capacity building, what they saw as probably challenges, and also to tell us some of the lessons learned from those practices that they've identified. I'll probably just start in order. I will start with Mr. Saito.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor to speak here. And as the first speaker, I want to be a bit thinking outside the box and scene set here, since we have a lot of panelists, and really describe what capacity building is in my viewpoint. As I was introduced, I've been doing cybersecurity for quite a while here, and I've seen several evolutions of this. And just even 5 years ago, the word cyber was not even popular, and now I think it's a bit too hot. And to ground things a little bit, I think instead of leaving you all scribbling furiously in writing a list of things to do and so on, I think it's probably more important to understand why we're in the state we are and why we should be doing the things we're doing. And let me start by saying that cybersecurity can be very, very complicated, but in another way of looking at it, it's very simple, that cybersecurity, or security for that matter, is a balance of three things. First, we want to be secure. We have to do it in some sort of budget. There's a cost involved. We don't have unlimited budgets. And the third thing that we often forget that we don't put into the balance of this is that cybersecurity is all about usability, because at the end of the day, humans are involved. And a lot of people forget this and how we balance this out. And so let me touch upon those 3 points as my 5 minutes. First of all, I think cost is not just the cost of human labor or buying a firewall or doing this or doing that. I think what we are now in today is the world where security has to be put in by design, that it has to be by default, that as a total cost of a system, to protect a system initially versus to clean up after the effects. Some studies have shown that it is 100 times more expensive to clean up after a breach or vulnerability. And so we are now definitely in a mandatory area of security by design, where we have people proficient in designing systems where security is put in at the ground level. And so this is going to be a capacity building here of people understanding why this is necessary to a system. Along this, I think that the second pillar, security, and why we're doing this and why we want to be secure. The other thing here in security is what a lot of people underestimate. And at the end of the day, security, frankly, is all about communication and the ability to communicate that quickly. That the problem we have today, often enough, is that we handle cyber and cybersecurity in traditional means where we try to hide it, we try to fix it, we try to cover it up, we try to pretend it doesn't exist. But I think for capacity building in general, we need to change the mindset of letting people understand that to communicate things faster is probably more important than anything here, really, at the end of the day. And having said that, it's just not being able to communicate, but communicating proficiently, because what I see, especially from where I come in the Asian part of the world, and it might be true for many other parts of the world as well, but especially in the Asian culture, is the educational system tends to split the sciences and the humanities. And often, cybersecurity, or IT, is seen as a science thing. And you take this to upper management, or you take this to a politician, or you take this to a bureaucrat, and it tends to be pigeonholed into a science thing, when in fact, I think that it's important that cybersecurity now emphasizes other things, not the mathematics of it all, not the computer science of it all necessarily, but it's things like psychology, economy, political science, user interface, legal. And these things tend to be traditionally, in many, many cultures, a very humanity origin things. And when you have this artificial divide between computer science and these humanities, it creates a communications mismatch where it's very hard to articulate the value, the importance, and the priority of some of these issues to the people who really need to know, people who run organizations, who are on top of governments and so on. So it's really this issue here where communications tends to be the crux of the matter, that there are pools of talent, but it's how you get these people to work together. The other issue here that I want to switch to is the third point about usability, that cybersecurity is often seen as a defensive thing. We come to these kind of conferences and it's always about the bad guys, the bad actors, where we're patching things, we're defending ourselves and so on. But what I also want to argue, and what I'm doing in my government as well, is that cybersecurity also has a flip side to this, that it is an enabler, that it's a differentiator, it's a competitive advantage, it's something that you could actually get ahead. So instead of just arguing the defensive posture and getting to zero, it's also very important as a society that cybersecurity enables and allows you to do things like take advantage of ICT at a very basic benefit, but to get ahead and be more competitive. And so I think that to differentiate, we were going to see more now in not only society's products, businesses, services, that safety and security is going to be a selling point. And so these are the areas where it's not just a defensive posture, but it's the building of cyber capacity so that sure, you have to have the defensive measures, but there is also an economic benefit aspect that one cannot forget in terms of the capacity building side. Having said that, also, it's important that when we do this usability, that we have this issue of not only organizations within themselves and communicating top-down management to engineering, et cetera, but in governments to get past silos, to get past stovepipes, that cybersecurity is inherently a PPP. It is a public-private partnership. 94% of the internet runs on private networks. So it is really not possible for governments to just solve this by themselves and vice versa. So it is requiring this working together so that we understand the multi-stakeholder issues that are involved in this. And I want to finally leave that, ironically, the more digital we get as a society, the more important it is that we have this human network. So at the end of the day, the cyber capacity building is really networks like this that we can talk and exchange ideas.
Thank you. I think I will probably talk really quickly as well. I think I'd agree with a lot of what you've just said. I think the one thing I maybe don't agree with is I don't think that we are at the stage yet where security is seen as a selling point. You know, I think it would be excellent if we get to that pace, and it would be great if we actually see buyers behave that way, because I think we're still at the stage where the cheaper, the better, right? And I think that's actually an important capacity building effort to look at. In terms of what we do as Microsoft, I think we are sort of probably the only private company on the panel here. But and sort of, so we don't have a necessarily unique regional or organizational perspective, but sort of work, I think, with the majority of regions here in capacity building efforts. And we do it at different levels, a little bit like William talked about. We do it at a policy level, where we work with governments, with organizations to basically share what we learned from working with other governments and organizations as they adapted policies. And we have the ability to look across the board. We have the ability to look at Australia, we have the ability to look at Japan, but also look at Argentina or Belgium and sort of compare and contrast. And obviously with a unique private sector Microsoft perspective, looked at what we thought worked particularly well for security of that country, to bring in other stakeholders, whether private sector or civil society, and others. We also work on a pure sort of safety level. I think the thing that people often forget is or don't realize necessarily, is the problem with security really is the people at the moment, I think, and that's not something that you can ever address. With sort of from our networks, what we're seeing is that 80% of attacks that are successful are because someone clicked on a phishing email. And and in any organization that will happen. It will happen in ours, it will happen in yours. It's the question of awareness raising and the question of getting people to understand what secure behaviors are. We are also increasingly doing more concrete technical trainings, capacity building. We announced maybe a week, 2 weeks ago, a consortium here in India working with PwC, Tata, IBM, Ernst & Young, there's like a whole selection of companies to try and address not just the policy frameworks, how do you build national strategies, how do you develop effective laws, but how do you actually, across the different technical stacks, so IBM versus Microsoft versus Amazon, how do you operate securely? So we're doing a training for, I think, 1,200 or something like that, officials in Indian government on safe identity policies, network security, end-to-end security, the latest sort of technologies in cloud, Internet of Things, and so on. And hopefully that's sort of one of the first ones. So I'm like, oh, there's no lessons learned. But, hopefully there's something that we can adapt and sort of go forward in other regions as well. Finally, I think I wanted to also talk about how we work and sort of try and influence also the offensive side of sort of the world we live in. Whether it's by providing customers with the tools to see what happens on their systems, or by encouraging a dialogue on sort of what responsible behavior in cyberspace is. And I don't really think there's we do very, very unique things. I think there's lots of companies that are sort of playing the same space and are helpful and try to evolve the dialogue. I think what I would probably argue would be the sort of the key takeaway is sort of the need for greater collaboration sort of across the private sector, across the public sector, and across the different regions. I think a little bit like, I think we talked in a couple of discussions earlier today, I think there's a lot going on. There's not necessarily, even within our company, it's hard to coordinate. And it's even harder to coordinate across different groups. So understanding what the best practices are, highlighting them, sort of as GCCS has done, and also try to coordinate them to ensure that there's the limited resources that we have, the limited funding that's available, is being used successfully and efficiently, I think is something that we'd call for.
Thank you very much. Firstly, just say thank you to the governments of the Netherlands and also to India for co-hosting us here today. And to applaud the efforts of the GCCS. It addresses such a fundamental issue when we're looking at capacity building, which is that coordination piece. How do we as a global community come together to understand what we're doing, try and deconflict where necessary and look where we can get more bang for our buck in partnership, and also bringing the private sector into that equation is incredibly important. And that's why Australia stood firm with you at The Hague and made sure that we were there supporting this important piece of work. So it's great to see it maturing and present here today. So, I mean, firstly, I'll make kind of 3 key points, if I may. Firstly is just looking at how is capacity building important to the Australian government. And put quite simply, it's central to so much of what we do in our international outreach and our international engagement on cyber affairs. And that stretches across the whole gamut of what we define as cyber affairs, which is from the economic prosperity issue to cybersecurity, combating cybercrime, issues of international security, addressing human rights issues, internet governance. We look at across the board and try and understand where capacity building can aid in uplifting different countries' understandings or capabilities in all of those areas. Something we've worked hard to do is link our cyber capacity building work into the broader technology for development discussion, but also into the mainstream aid and development work and portfolio within the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And we think that's an incredibly important area to integrate ourselves into because it mainstreams the whole issue. We feel that this is a conversation that needs to take place wherever you might be in government, and it needs to be prioritized as such. And we've been quite successful in doing that in Australia. We stand firm in trying to partner to progress good, sound cybersecurity practices and to encourage the use of digital technologies for that broader sustainable development piece, and particularly in the region in which we sit, in the Indo-Pacific. And we've put our money where our mouth is. We've over tripled our capacity building funds now. We've invested $14 million over the next 3 years in the hope of really increasing capabilities across the region in which we sit. And it's also important to say that actually, okay, we all have limited resources, but actually small amounts of money can go an awful long way, I think, in this area. It's not always that we need to be spending billions of dollars on new ICT infrastructures for every country that we meet. Often it can be still the policy frameworks, the architecture of engagement that can be some of the most important value adds that we can add. So our efforts cover the whole gamut of those different elements of cyber affairs as we see it. But as it currently stands, we're investing heavily in looking at raising awareness of cyber issues in the region. We're improving technical capabilities in the region, and we're also trying to strengthen legislative frameworks in the Indo-Pacific to uplift law enforcement capabilities, judiciary's abilities to target and successfully prosecute cyber criminals. One of the, I think we've just flagged that in two previous speakers, one of the most important elements of this is knowing as government that we don't have all of the answers and making sure that this is a partnership in coordination and cooperation with the private sector, with academia and NGOs. And often we can say that, but do we embody it as governments? And that's something where we're working hard to adjust and work by the calculus that we all stand to benefit if we invest in capacity building and do it in partnership. Something that we did when we launched, and I'll shamelessly hold up a copy of our strategy, when we launched that in early October, we also launched a range of public-private partnerships. We launched projects with Qantas in the aviation sector, Westpac Bank, Commonwealth Bank, Palo Alto Networks, and a host of other partners, including AP-NIC, and there's lots of friends and colleagues in the audience today, the Australian National University, Macquarie University. And there's a whole range of public-private partnerships that we launched to show that there is a community sense of shared purpose and objectives in this area. It's not just that governments should do this by themselves. And actually, what that means is that you reach constituents that you would never reach by yourself. There was a famous beer advert from the 1980s that I remember, which is, that this beer reaches the parts that other beers can't. What we're saying is that with our partnerships, we can reach constituents that we otherwise wouldn't reach or would perhaps choose not to listen to us. So we're working extensively on that. I thought I'd very briefly outline a project that we're working on, and then just a quick couple of lessons learned. And I promised not to speak for 50 minutes as I was threatening beforehand, Carrie-Anne. I was trying to put the fear in Carrie-Anne that I would do. One thing that we've launched as well is a collaborative CERT project with CERT Australia across the Pacific region. And this is the Pacific Cybersecurity Operational Network, or PACSON, and it consists of technical experts and NGOs and academia in order to create not only networks of those who are working in building CERT capacity in the region and those that will become the CERTs of the future in the Pacific Islands, but it's also intended to empower those individuals and those groups so that they can actually own the capability in the longer term. Providing threat information sharing, upskilling one another through shared experience, and just sharing those techniques and ideas that uplift the community. And we look to provide the members with toolkits that they can take away and use in their work, And we really feel that it's an enabler of cooperation and if you like, shared endeavor, building capacity together. So what are the lessons? And this is finally the final point I made. What are some of the lessons we've learned from doing this? Even though it's still in its early stages, I think there are some common takeaways that it's great to see in the documentation that we'll be discussing in the Q&A. Firstly, the importance of placing the capability in the hands of the owners of that capability and making sure that it's a long-term investment. It's not just a boom or bust approach, dropping the capability and running away. It's about saying we'll invest in that capability for the long term to ensure this, that it's sustainable. So it's important to look at the sustainability of any project that we invest in, and certainly that's something we took an acute view on the Paxson effort. And the other part is needing intergovernmental and cross-governmental cooperation and coordination. Internally, we have to do that. So, it's orders of magnitude beyond when you look internationally. So every 3 months, we meet as a community inside the Australian government to make sure that that program of work is working properly and we're across each other's briefs. And I think the final part is just don't assume that we know everything. As governments, occasionally maybe we have a tendency to do so. Make sure you don't think that. Reach out and engage with others. And actually the capacity building that you then deliver, we feel will be far more rich, robust, and it will have longevity.
Well, I would like to start also thanking the organization of this event. I'm representing Interpol here, and capacity building is one of our core values. So we pretty much understand the value of this kind of events here, but especially the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise is definitely a wonderful initiative. But giving a step back, before talking about cyber, Interpol, being the largest police organization, has a very clear vision, which is connecting police for a safer world. And that doesn't mean to stretch a landline from here to the neighboring countries so police officers can talk to each other. Of course, this is part of it, but it's definitely not enough. So in many cases, they need to be able to talk at the same level. They need to understand the same issues so they can cooperate. Of course, this can be achieved only through capacity building. And there is another component of that, that is communication is just the first step. As soon as they can talk to each other, we expect them to be able to cooperate. We expect them to be able to share intelligence matters, to be able to conduct operations together, and this is something that we need to learn along the way, and we need to be able to provide to our members. So that being said, when we move it to a new area of Interpol, when we started to have a specific cyber team working specifically on the new trends and the more advanced topics of cyber, we stumbled upon a few points. One of these points is how do we intersect cybercrime with cybersecurity? Most of us are sometimes concerned only about putting our systems back if something bad happens. There's so much talked about cyber resilience, but not every time we are concerned about how do we make sure that all the evidence left by the criminals is preserved so the police can do its work. So what we are trying to do along the way, and one of our best success cases here is the connection between the industry, search, academia, and law enforcement in order to make sure that every step you take will fulfill its own mission, but will not create difficulties for the other parties as well. We have some very good examples of how it can work, but let's focus a bit more on concrete projects we have in the region and things that we are doing specifically here for the Asian continent. We are working very closely with some agencies, donor agencies, for example, Japan, the JAI Fund, and Canada are some of our closest partners. We are going to many of the countries in the region to first and foremost understand what they need. And that is a lesson learned from a few of other projects we had in the past, that for the most that we think that the countries are similar, that they are facing similar issues, they might not have similar internal structures, they might not have similar understanding of the issue, therefore they might need a tailored development for their own reality. So first, we will conduct these, what we call cyber assessments. We understand that is crucial. we need to see the difference. Of course, if you are running a company, we will not work on any capacity building activity before you know exactly what you need to do. It seems pretty obvious. But for law enforcement, it's not so obvious. We believe that we understand how it works because we work with that, but we don't realize that because of, as Toby mentioned, because of legal frameworks in the other jurisdiction, their necessity might be different. So we start with assessment. It is expensive, it takes time. Sometimes it seems that you are just researching and not actually acting on something, but it is crucial. That's the first point. The second point I would raise here is for a effective connection between law enforcement and the remaining actors of this cyberspace, concrete actions are needed. So we are trying to do it by organizing specific operations around some particular topics. So for example, let's imagine that here in India, a big problem for cybersecurity is, let's imagine something not so critical, for example, website defacement. So let's go around this topic. Let's find the key players around that. Let's see who has to be involved in a complete investigation from end to end to analyze what is happening there, who is involved in it, which players have to be engaged in order to get to a final and good prosecution process, and let's do it concretely. And we are doing it in many regions. We did it for Southeast Asia recently, and the idea of that is it is not only a capacity building activity, but it's also a networking opportunity for our members, but it's especially a way for us to understand what they need, based on their own capability, but based as well on the local cases, on the local things they are facing more frequently. So that's our main goal. We are doing it in partnership with academic bodies as well. We are trying to develop new technologies so we can use it as a driving force for this distribution of knowledge. And I believe GFCE poses a very good platform for this interaction. We have a very similar role as GFCE within the law enforcement community. Interpol has 192 countries as its members, so we have a quite good reach only for law enforcement. And as I just said, this is not enough. We need to be able to reach out to the other stakeholders, and I believe this is a very good platform for that.
Okay, let me start by adding that in addition to my institutional affiliation, I'm on this panel also as the member of the GFC Advisory Board, and several of our members are in the room. However, I will not be making official remarks on behalf of the board, but rather maybe identify some of the recurrent themes that we have identified, or I have identified in our discussions over the past year and a half. And thank you to the GFC Secretariat for making space for us on this panel. Now, what I'd like to start with is maybe a bit of a history about cybersecurity capacity building, because I think that very often we actually forget what a long way we have done since the first discussions about cybersecurity capacity building in Seoul. The Hague was a big step forward with the establishment of GFCE, and now we're finally meeting in India to actually discuss the concerns that the other part of the world are actually sharing. So I think we have to, we deserve a big round of applause as the cybersecurity community in its own right. Secondly, I think the fact that the cybersecurity building community has emerged as such is already a big achievement. And I looked at the GFCE roll-ups, which say connecting the dots on cybersecurity capacity building, but I think over those years, you have done much more than that. It has been about connecting different communities and connecting people. So I think that's also a very important thing to be acknowledged at the beginning. But that brings me to the reflection on where we actually stand right now. And I think the underestimated aspect in our discussions is actually that if you look around the room, it's not only people who are working on cybersecurity per se, but most importantly, people who actually work in very different communities, whether you talk about CBMs that are developed within the OSCE, whether you talk about development community, which is represented by development agencies or OECD, or diplomatic bodies for that matter, which are much more concerned with the discussions about norms and international law. So I think if you put all that together and to identify capacity building as a common denominator, it's already a very important aspect to, and contribution to the conversation about where we're going next. Now, what is the challenge that's emerging from those diverse perspectives? And I think it's a big one, because as we talked about cyber capacity building, we have to keep in mind that there is no one capacity building, that there are many different logics that are underpinning our reflection about what this community and work is about. We have the reflection about markets, about access, about development, or about building resilience. And all those elements have actually their own vision, their own principles and approaches to how capacity should be done. So I think that's something that should maybe be reflected a bit more in our work. But that brings me to the second part that we were asked to think about, which is the role of GFCE. Given the history and, well, a short history of this body, I think it's actually very useful to think about GFC as certain custodian of practice and knowledge. I think the knowledge part, we have it pretty much covered. We have created a lot of instruments that actually give us an overview and try to create these connections of what different parts of the community are doing. And maybe the part that needs to be strengthened a bit more, and I think that's partly being done with the reflection on global good practices, is really the part of, you know, what is there that we can build on. And the big role for the GFC that I see is really trying to play this role as a custodian of practice. Something that is really very important if we take into account that this is the area where the rotation of people is actually very dynamic. If you look around the room, there are some familiar faces, but a lot of people actually who are here maybe were not there 4 years ago. So I think we need an institution where this idea and the institutional knowledge is actually preserved. And I think that maybe GFC could play that role. Finally, let me talk a bit about success factors for GCCB. And here I put my advisory board members' hat. What we have noticed, and here I echo Toby's remarks about the role of civil society. What we've noticed in the works of this community is very often reflection on the role of multi-stakeholder approach and the role of civil society. But very often we think it's actually paying a lip service to the community as such. So what we would like to acknowledge and maybe encourage everyone in this room to think about a bit more is how do we actually engage civil society a bit more. The public partner partnerships have been actually already mentioned, but we see that very often whenever we talk about stakeholders and their role in the process, it's very much limited to the governments and private sector as such. Whereas there is a big part that's being played by the civil society organizations, especially when we talk about rights-based approaches and the promotion of different values in the capacity building efforts. I also think that we need more clarity on the vision, and I think that the opening remarks by the two co-chairs were actually very enlightening, because what I've noticed is that we have a free, open, and secure internet being promoted by the Netherlands. But at the same time, we talk about safe, secure, and inclusive internet when we look at the government of India and its representation. And I think that's something to be reflected upon again. Are these two visions complementary? Are they conflicting? Where do we agree and where do we disagree? Because I think that once we look into specific principles and ideas that are behind of each of those visions, we might arrive at different conclusions and reach different points in our reflection about cybersecurity capacity building, which then have very concrete impact on the implementation processes. Finally, we were encouraged to share a bit our experiences with the capacity building projects, and my institution is not involved in the implementation of cybersecurity building initiatives as such. But what we try to do is look at it from the analytical perspective. And we are currently involved in the preparation of the operational guidelines for the European Commission for the implementation of capacity building projects. And that project, well, I think it's 4 months old now, has already given us a lot of interesting food for thought. First of all, we've noticed that there is extensive body of policy work being already done. and looking at how the European Union has advanced its thinking about the cybersecurity capacity building, we're actually encouraged to see what the breadth of literature and reflection there already is. That's maybe very often going under, not noticed in our discussions. Only yesterday, the Council has adopted conclusions on digital for development, which talks about cybersecurity capacity building at length. So I would encourage you to have a look at that and see how the European reflection in that field is evolving. We've also noticed that there is a large body of principles that we can borrow from and build on. And some of the developmental principles were mentioned by David. But I would also like to mention many other principles that are out there in other communities that are involved in capacity building. And if you think about inclusiveness that the representative from India mentioned, we have principles that are related to access for all, duty of care, and so on and so forth, that we also think should be brought on board as part of the reflection about the future of cybersecurity capacity building. And finally, there are also ample methodologies on how these things should be done. So this is a bit of a cautionary tale, but also maybe the point where the work within this community has advanced at the slowest pace. The idea of how do we actually do cybersecurity capacity building? What are the methods for the evaluation and monitoring of capacity building projects? And I think that's maybe something that could be brought forward with the reflection about the global agenda. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's always hard to be the last to speak because everything has already been said. But I'll first of all thank the GFC and the Indian government for the kind invitation and very good organization. In terms of best practice, I think the fact that we're all here in this room is a best practice and a demonstration of international collaboration. In terms of what we've learned and the challenges, firstly, one lesson is the need to broaden our definition of what we mean by cybersecurity and cybersecurity capacity building. We've tended in the past to focus a lot on the technical aspects of protecting our infrastructure, protecting our systems, protecting our data. But increasingly in today's world, we see more of the social dimension. I think the American president has made the issue fake news very much on the news. So teaching people how to assess the accuracy or the reality or truth or trustworthiness of information becomes just as important as teaching them how to use and protect their devices. In Kenya, we have an example of our child online protection program, which is a partnership between the private sector. I think companies like Microsoft and Google have been involved, our regulator, the Communications Authority, and UNICEF coming together in a very interesting way and actually visiting schools. And when they visit, they bring together the parents, the school administration, and the students to discuss issues of how children secure themselves. Then there's the issue of deepening our concept of cybersecurity. Well, cybersecurity is quickly becoming what, in the 21st century, what witchcraft was in the 16th or 17th century. Everybody's afraid of it. Very few people understand it, and some people have felt its devastating impacts. I don't know whether this gathering is a holy inquisition, but I've realized that it's really important to create simple conceptual models that help society understand what this is, what's happening, what exactly is the risk, and how this works, really to demystify cybersecurity. Now, one of the ways we've done this is, again, a partnership I had the privilege of attending a conference in Nigeria where they use simple games using actors to demonstrate to the audience how a cybersecurity event proceeds. And this was so helpful that we actually invited them to Kenya, and we did something similar. And we are currently exploring, I hope something we can do with GFC also, how we can build games and exercises that help not just the technical community, but also society at large to demystify cybersecurity. The third issue is extending the reach of cybersecurity training. You may or may not know that Kenya has placed 1 million devices in the hands of 6-year-olds recently. And I was thinking about it, and we did it so that our youth would be equipped with 21st century skills, including digital skills. But if we don't have a component of ethics and values built into this training, we could also have introduced 1 million cyber criminals into the space in 5 or 10 years' time. So we don't have the answer to that immediately, but this partnership, this global conversation helps us to learn from others and also get good minds to think about what we need to do in this space. And this extends everywhere. I mean, in the city of Nairobi today, you can't park unless you download the city app onto your phone. So regardless of how old you are, you certainly need some kind of skill, and you certainly need some way of protecting your device. So we need to extend cybersecurity capacity building into society, not only for the very young, but to everyone. And I'm very glad that society, culture, and skills is part of the GFC agenda. And I'll be very glad to hear from anyone who has answers to some of the issues that I've raised. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just given some room to breathe, so now I can relax a little bit more. We have a little bit more time for the panel. One interesting thing, I think, from the presentations that were made in terms of global best practices is that from a regional private sector, government, and even the law enforcement perspective, each of our speakers emphasized similar best practices, one of which was public-private partnership, emphasizing how important it is to actually have that. Another thing I think that was interesting coming out of all the presentations, and even Catherine ended with it, is the introduction of technology. Kaya mentioned it from the perspective of products being able to be developed and actually providing that. And Catherine spoke about it from the perspective of ensuring that our youth are introduced to technology at an early age to ensure that we can have some amount of future in terms of who's actually doing it. Some of the other key things that came out, and I'm just highlighting it because I want to encourage the dialogue to see if there are other areas that we've missed. Another thing that came out were toolkits. Dr. Fiken mentioned that in terms of actually looking at what we have, which was emphasized by Interpol, doing assessments, developing toolkits would then facilitate it, and then also developing guidelines, which Patrick spoke about. So I realized that there are some common themes coming out of all the presentations in the sense that some of our global best practices need to address what the needs are and then actually start to look at tools that we can offer to put towards it. On that note, I think I wanted to ask Silvino to probably continue a bit of what he was saying regarding the interplay as a best practice between CERTs, law enforcement, and private sector. And then I'll probably ask Kaya as well from the perspective of Microsoft's Cybercrime Lab, in terms of how do you see that being fed as a part of a global best practice to see private sector and law enforcement working together at a capacity level to build the capacity of the persons who have to investigate?
Thank you for the question. This is one of our main headaches nowadays, if I can use this expression. Let me resort to an example that everybody will understand. WannaCry. The ones who didn't see that screen probably were not around any media outlet in May, so probably you know that red screen where a piece of software is telling you that you probably lost everything you had in your computer, and you could try to send some money to criminals and expect something would be brought back to you. This is a good example of the interaction between law enforcement and CERTs has to be very well coordinated. So let's imagine on the first moment when you see this screen on your computer, who would be the first person you will call? Would that be the police? Probably not. And I can tell you that that was not what happened on that day. We had the statistics of it. We could see how long it took for the society to come to the law enforcement and then for us to be able to act upon it. As any law enforcement, we have to be provoked. Somebody has to come to us and tell us, look, something is happening, I need your support. Of course, we have mechanisms to identify these patterns and try to trigger some response, but that response at that level, on those very first days, on those days that the damage was carried out, can only be achieved by the CERTs and by the industry. So how can we cooperate between the kind of things we are teaching to our partners in the countries, our law enforcement partners in the countries, with the action of the CERTs? What do we do in countries that there is not even a CERT, which is the reality for some of our members? So there is a big gap there in between the goals. Of course, we are always focused on the attribution. We want to put people behind bars. That's what makes us happy. But of course, the CERT community and the industry has to work on the resilience aspect. They have to work on a plan to put things back together. So the process of bringing these together for us is definitely capacity building. That's the mechanism we find to go from an entirely open gap between law enforcement and the industry to something that actually works. So let's imagine in a scenario that we saw not so long ago with the White Rabbit attack, very similar to what happened with WannaCry. Once more, the first action that could have been taken there was to, for example, on the first case, register a domain address, the famous kill switch, which stopped the spread of it. So was it effective at that point? In some regions, yes. In some, not, because of the lack of training. We had examples of countries where that particular address was blocked. So by, of course, thinking on the best intentions and trying to understand what was happening, and by blocking that kill switch address, the WannaCry worm was able to continue to expand its reach. So it's a gap that we need to bridge. And capacity building for us is a connection between law enforcement, proper sense, judiciary branch. Of course, the prosecution aspect of it is crucial, but mostly we need to jump from our very small world and be able to reach out to the CERT community and to be able to reach out to ISPs in a faster and more effective manner as well. So for us, it's a priority.
Kaya?
I would agree. I think the coordination between the three is critical. I think like you were saying, I think the important things to keep in mind is also the completely different levels of capability that different countries have in this space. You know, and it's not necessarily a question of emerging economies versus developed societies, but if even if you look at somewhere like in Italy or Slovenia, where you have basically maybe one, maybe two people that are sort of staffing the CERT locally for the whole country. And Italy is a very large country. I think it's just very difficult for them to sort of follow the sort of what's going on a continuous basis. Microsoft, to this end, has made available through sort of a set of programs, sort of a lot of threat information that we make available to the CERT community to this end, to sort of make sure that they're aware of the threats as we see them on our networks. But again, there needs to be someone on the other side that can actually act on it. And I think that's often where the challenge lies, right? I think it's even when the industry provides a lot of the information, only the most sophisticated agencies can actually use it and understand it and sort of go deep in it to sort of do attribution and things like that. I think that's a very limited skill set at the moment, and the ability to sort of raise awareness, do training, also to make sure that certs around the world know what's available and how to get it. I think it's important. I think the other thing the last thing I would say on this from our perspective is, because oftentimes, you share companies' proprietary information with them. That's also where the sort of sound legal frameworks come in. Whether it's copyright, whether it's IP, whether it's cybercrime laws, as sort of our lawyers would, if you don't have those in place, our lawyers would be like, no, we cannot share, right? So I think it kind of goes hand in hand.
I think Patrick wanted to comment.
Yeah, I have a quick comment on the way how you framed the question. I agree that public-private partnerships are an important element, and I think we all used to thinking about the relationships in cybersecurity in this way. But I would like to propose maybe actually moving beyond this two-track approach and including the civil society organizations in there as well. So for the lack of the better wording, call it public-private partnerships. And it's simply because you have one important dimension which is simply not covered by public-private partnerships. And to give you two examples, when we talk about rights of victims of cybercrime, it's not really covered by governments most of the time or by private sector. So you need consumers or consumer organizations or someone else who steps in order to ensure that those rights are actually protected. When we talk about the rights of criminals as well, let's not forget that these guys also have the right to due process. And that's something that needs to be taken into account as well. And will probably not come from anywhere else. Like you said, the Interpol's interest is in putting those guys behind the bars. Probably some of the governments that not necessarily share the most democratic values in the world would also like to see certain time of people behind the bars. But it's also the role of the third leg in this equation, if you want, of ensuring that actually we put the right people behind the bars and not necessarily those that have been classified as the right ones by the governments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question to two more of the panelists and then open it up to the floor for questions. And the two questions, the question I have actually goes to Saito and to Dr. Feiken. Both of you spoke about one, doing security by design, which will ultimately mean a budget. And Dr. Feiken spoke a lot about sustainability and invested in cybersecurity up front. And those two are considered to be some very good practice, but tangibly, for those of us who are here who may not be able to identify, where do I find this budget? What would this budget look like? How can we utilize a resource such as the GFCE for sustainability of efforts instead of having budget allocation specific? So then if you could share some more views on what you were thinking of when you spoke about investment.
So the example that I often use, and to Kaya's point, I'll give an example of security as a benefit as well to this. In Japan, coincidentally, we have the Olympics coming up in less than 3 years' time. And the Minister of Olympics, as a matter of trivia, is also our Minister for Cybersecurity. And this is actually convenient for me because I often use the analogy that in 1964, Tokyo hosted the first Olympics. And what a lot of people in the world really remember of the Tokyo Olympics, if you're old enough, is the bullet train. And I use this example because a lot of people misconstrue the greatness of the bullet train because it went really, really fast. But frankly, in 1964, anybody could have done a fast train. You just put a rocket at the end of the train and it'll go fast. The point that made the bullet train actually unique was not its speed or fastness. It was the brakes and its ability to stop quickly. And I think this analogy is actually very apropos, that to go fast, whether it's a train or in IT, you need good brakes. And so cybersecurity is that brakes for IT in some sense. And so for security to be designed in the beginning, a good brake system, for example, I think applies here, because if you design a great app or a great service or a great product, you have a situation where then a security incident happens and you bolt on the security. Even I think Microsoft has a study that shows that it's easier to contain and it's hundreds of times cheaper to contain the breach before it happens if you could design by that security. And so I think what should not be lost on people is the concept of total cost of ownership. What the entirety of that system is, not only in the CapEx of things, but the OpEx of things. And security is definitely part of that equation. And so I can make an argument very, very easily, and as technical as you want, on how designing the security will not only make usability easier so that you have less stress on your call centers and reset passwords and stuff, but overall in potential breaches, but in just being able to do things on the cloud or things that I think one of the panelists said people are afraid of. And so it's these kinds of things where it goes directly to competitiveness and directly to productivity, where security is essential, that you need to put that in because it's part of that process now. It's not an option.
Okay, so I'll build on that from the human perspective, which I think we've discussed a bit. So a good example of how we would do that. So there's a larger scale development project the Australian government runs to bring mobile banking platforms to a broader audience within the Pacific. And part of the discussion that we've had with the delivery of that program and a project that we'll take forward over the coming months is how do we then co-design the delivery of those mobile banking platforms with cybersecurity or cyber safety awareness training alongside that to the new user, because we do know that first-time users are often the most susceptible to all of the spoof emails or basically more susceptible to being tripped up along the way. So that's one way that we're trying to, on the human side, develop that awareness piece. When I talked about sustainability, it was in reference to, from the design point of any project, thinking about it not just as a 2-3 month investment, but thinking about it as a longer term investment. So it's not just about doing some capacity building in the short term so we all feel good and we think we've delivered some kind of capability. It's about thinking in years and a sustained investment of time, people, effort, and money. And that making sure at the end of that time cycle, there's actually a domestic capability that's left in place, rather than, again, just a capability which evaporates. And I've seen so many examples of that over the years that it becomes a bit depressing. I think one of the fun things is that we've got Carrie-Anne who's chairing and actually has got a lot of knowledge here. So it'd be interesting to hear the example from the OAS's perspective, in terms of how you've looked at cyber capacity building, maybe some unique lessons that you might have had from your regional perspective. Sorry to take over the chair.
Well, Dr. Falcon tried to switch roles just now. I'll open it up to the floor just to see if there are any questions before I answer the question. We have a question over here. Is there a roving mic?
Thanks. Pawan Dugal, Chairman of the International Commission on Cybersecurity Law and President cyberlaws.net. My question to the panel. In terms of cyber legal capacity building, what kind of frameworks are currently going to be adopted moving forward? Because this is the least of the priorities. Now with Internet of Things coming in big way, artificial intelligence coming in, and cybersecurity blooming, the question is, how can we train the lawyers? Because at the end of the day, given yourself 2 years, the situation will be dramatically different. Unfortunately, there are no international mechanisms to treat cyber lawyers or give massive capacity building. We're talking about primarily capacity building of government, of law enforcement. But ultimately, it will be the lawyers or the cyber lawyers who will be helping people in distress. So my question to the panelists as to what is happening internationally on cyber law capacity building, number one. And number two, what can be done going forward to create far more bigger population of cyber lawyers to help the netizen community at large. Thanks.
So probably on that note, I think Catherine has a response, and I'll probably use this opportunity to answer Dr. Falcon's question as well. All right, so for example, the Organization of American States, we have a cybersecurity program that focuses on 3 main pillars: cyber policy, technical training, and we focus on research and outreach. As a part of our policy development, we assist our member states in the development of national cybersecurity strategies. And we try to let them look at it similar to the perspective you have at a very wide angle, meaning that how is it that I can actually prepare myself as a nation to address cybersecurity threats, not just for the present, but for the future. So usually our strategies do cover strands such as a general overview and review of legislation throughout, not just related to cyber, but we ask our member states to look at your electronic transactions, your privacy legislation, your constitution, look at it as a holistic review and to see, okay, where are the gaps if we have to enforce? Many of our strategies also include, and you can go online and you'll find copies of it, also include looking at the judicial system and building in training as a part of that. So it goes hand in hand with reviewing your legislation, but at the same time, having your judiciary, having your law enforcement persons, having your prosecutors actually at the same table. So similarly, when we do policy development in our training, we've had instances where we've actually brought together parliamentarians who actually have to approve the legislation, and we've brought to the same table persons who are certs, because they're the ones who have to explain this technical term, and we bring to the table as well persons who actually enforce. So we have the prosecutors with us. So one of the things that we recommend as a best practice is something that Patrick spoke about. It's not just PPP, but it's more a multi-stakeholder approach to ensuring that when you develop capacity at a national level, you're bringing every single aspect of the food chain. So it has to be an entire ecosystem, developing each based on where it is by doing an assessment, which we spoke about before, and then building on that. And I think on that note, I think Catherine had some input as well.
Okay. I don't have the complete answer, but certainly, I worked in the University of Nairobi for many years, so maybe I can tell you what happened there. Initially, we took the very naive approach of just making sure that all the students in the law school went through some computer appreciation course. Of course, that helped, but it's not what you're talking about, because there are these very quickly emerging technologies that raise all kinds of questions. They're not just technical questions, they're social questions. There's a complete philosophy of artificial intelligence, which means that the conversation is not just about having the skills. Later on, we actually tried to develop a postgraduate course for lawyers, which was a collaboration between the computer science school, the School of Telecommunications, and the School of Law. We didn't actually succeed because it was very, very difficult at those times to have that conversation, even though we had a generous sponsor in terms of Siemens, because in that case they were having difficulty in getting lawyers who could help in developing telecommunications policy, for example. However, I think your question is deeper, and it refers not only to lawyers, but to all of us. And I think, education now has to be lifelong. The shelf life of any kind of education and skill in today's world is becoming extremely short. So the traditional education system that we had, you went to primary school, to high school, to university, and then the rest of your life you're okay, is not really working in today's world. And of course, people are teaching themselves in Kenya using YouTube. You've heard of an athlete who came from not knowing what a javelin was to getting a gold medal, just training himself on YouTube. So really getting people interested, getting people able to evaluate where they are, and just equipping them with the skills through formal and informal methods, I think is the best method that we have in today's world. But I hope this conversation will continue and we will see exactly how to do it. And I agree, we have the Kenya School of Law, we have the Judicial Training Institute, and we have tried to get a leg in the door in those institutions to help. And one more thing I'll say is that in Kenya, our constitution requires us to have a multi-stakeholder approach to everything. So we have been working together with our Law Reform Commission and the judiciary, the prosecutors. Sometimes it's very difficult, but we have to be together to talk about any policy, including ICT.
Yeah, so really small, quick plug, but it's what you described is a very tough problem that I just experienced. I just spent the last 2 days as part of a commissioner for something called the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. And I half-jokingly was one of the few non-lawyers in the room. And let me tell you, to even define the words so that we all talk on the same page is a challenge. But I really encourage people to, again, Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, in talking about norms and how these issues really are not only multi-stakeholder, but they cut across many boundaries, and that even getting the words themselves in sync is a challenge that there are groups here that are working on this.
We have one question in the row right there. Anyone else have any questions after this?
Hello, I'm Gauss. I'm from FIRST. So I do have a question for Saito-san, but...
Gauss, could you probably share with everyone what FIRST is?
Yes, indeed I will.
It's important to know.
Thank you. And before asking question to Saito-san, I would just like to say thank you very much on behalf of CSIRT, because FIRST stands for Forum of Incident and Security Response Teams. So we are the guys that were being mentioned who are jumping up and down and trying to solve the bad stuff that is happening. So thank you very much. Now the question for Saito-san. Would you like to expand, when you were saying to design products with security in mind from the beginning, and then you are describing some things, does that also encompasses creating capabilities within those manufacturers, within those vendors to support those products, or have you been thinking only about products as such? To what extent you were thinking about design and producing secure products when you're talking about it?
So 2 things, at least from my context. One, Japan is very famous for a couple things, but what's really critical right now is its aging population. And we're, as a shrinking population as well, much more dependent on IT than many people realize, including the Japanese people, that we're going to be reliant on robotics, AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, automated vehicles, faster than most other countries. Yet we cannot expect our grandparents to remember 20-character passwords and change them every week. And so how do we address this issue in an IT-dependent society that's aging? This is a problem in some sense, but I think an opportunity in another, where we look at security and design from a different perspective on how we address that new group of people, not just the digital natives, but these people who are highly dependent on this. And so that's an area where I think security by design and usability becomes critical. The other example, I won't try to name names, but there is an automobile company that when they first created the automobile, their version of this, they claimed over-the-air, OTA updates of software. And they were ridiculed because a lot of the other competitive automotive makers said, hey, that's very dangerous, and how would you do that, and why would you do that? Let me tell you, by doing that security by design and assuming that you need to be having a great update mechanism and updating after the fact, and that no system is perfect and we need to keep updating these things, that is paying dividends. Whereas there is another automotive manufacturer, which again will remain unnamed, but they had a problem. They had a vulnerability. And they had no mechanism to update. So they mailed out USBs to their customers. And at the end of, I think, a year, they only found that 1% of the people upgraded their automobiles. And so these are going to be issues in a very IoT, very IT-centric world, where not only do we look at usability from an elderly generation, no system is perfect, we need to have these automated mechanisms for updating and how we handle these things, because the certs can't always be there. And even if they're there, a final example is there was a web server bug that was announced by many certs in March, yet led to a huge PII breach in the US a few months later, where people knew about it, but it's these kinds of situations where better communications, better automation, these things are still in its infancy that we need to do much better in also that development of cyber skills.
So we have 2 reactions from the panel to your question, and then we have one last question in the back from Robert. So we'll just take Kaya first, then Silvino, and then we'll take the question in the back, and then we'll try to wrap up. Thank you.
I would just say, that's the almost critical point, right? I think we as an IT industry, over the past decade, I think, struggled through get to the point where we now, by majority, do security by design, have processes in place where every single piece of code goes through basically a security assessment. And when you talked about the Microsoft knows how expensive it is, yes, because I think back in 2004, before Vista, I think, we stopped the product. We basically stopped shipping anything for over a year because we had to redesign it, everything, and it was problematic. But today, as William mentioned, we have come to a point where every company is a technology company. It really is. We're in a world where I think Goldman Sachs has something like 3,000 engineers, right? Which is kind of very close to what Facebook has. And so having those perspectives and understanding that all companies now not just use technology, but create code, but don't have the practices that I think IT has learned over the past decade central to them, is going to be a big problem. And this is partly why you still have products going on the market day to day, because you want to be first to market versus you want to be secure to market. So I think there's a sort of a capacity building both from the various institutions here, but also from the IT industry, to sort of look at, publish how we learned what we've learned, sort of familiarize other industries with best practices, whether it's patching, whether it's vulnerability disclosure, whether it is sort of developing products and what standards can help you with that.
Very quickly on that, elaborating a bit on the security by design concept. We discussed it a bit, and we worked with colleagues from the South Australia University on forensic by design concept. The idea behind that, if we could establish protocols that something after an incident happened could be forensically analyzed, we would be tackling one of the roots of the cyber security issues nowadays, that is the very low successful prosecution rates of the crimes today. The confidence level for the criminals is quite high, so they have a very wide reach. They are suffering very few reactions to their actions. So for them, it's easy to move forward. So after security by design, something similar to a forensics by design that would help law enforcement to, at some point, collect the evidence they need to go after attribution, would at some point raise a bit of this bar and make the criminals have to invest a bit more to get into this kind of business.
Thank you. We have the last question in the back.
Thank you. Robert Collett. I'm in charge of the UK Cybersecurity Capacity Building Programme. I had 2 points and then my question for the panel. The first point was to say a huge thank you to the Secretariat, those on the panel and those in the room who are doing so much to build this community, who have got us to this point of nearly having a global agenda, are starting their own programs, are making this a network that works. We really appreciate it and we're proud to be a part of it. The first question about legal training, that I think for me is a concrete example of how this should work, in that we have the global agenda, nearly. It has a theme in there under which legal training can be included. It's designed to take account of that. And that will hopefully lead to concrete conversations between people who offer that sort of training, such as the International Association of Prosecutors, those who are funding that sort of training, such as the UK, and those who are looking to benefit from that sort of training. So this will be both a matchmaking forum, but also a forum where those ideas turn into concrete realities with best practice behind them. So I really hope that will be an outcome from this discussion. And finally, the question to the panel, which is, we've come a long way in the last few years. Where do you hope that we will be by the next time we meet at a global conference on cyberspace? What is the next big step we can take after the global agenda?
If anyone wants to take a stab at it, I'll limit you to one sentence. Anyone wants to take a stab at it? Because I think it's a very concrete objective I think Rob is asking about. The next time we come together, where would you want to see us?
Well, I would say that the next time we come together, we will be able to assess the results of some of these initiatives in a very concrete manner based on the results, metrics, and basically be able to provide the evidence to our policymakers, the evidence that they're asking for all the time whenever we go and ask for more money on capacity building projects. So that would be my wish for the next year or 2 years, I don't know.
Thank you. Anyone else? From the OAS perspective, I think the next time we sit together, I think we would want to actually see, just like Patrick, advancement in some of the initiatives and start to see tangible results and having some of the beneficiaries actually come back to these meetings and actually share with the Secretariat and to the members how these initiatives has actually benefited them. So since we have some very shy panelists for our conclusion, I'm going to just give a quick overview before I thank them. I think some of the things that popped out was, one, we have to think outside the box when we look at capacity building. IT is an enabler. We have to do assessment, and we have to start looking at education through a continuous perspective and a more robust perspective. I think what I liked was, don't forget the human element, the X factor. We are the end and the start of a lot of the security. Toolkits and guidelines are needed, and multi-stakeholder collaboration. I think just the panel reflects that. So on that note, I'd like to thank each of my panelists for being such gracious speakers, and thank the GFCE for putting this panel together. Thank you.
Well, again, thank you, all panelists. Please sit down for 1 minute. Because before we go to the break, I think this is the highlight of today. I would like to announce the 4th edition. Together, this is on behalf also of the African Union, of the European Union, and also of the Organization of American States. I would like to launch the 4th edition of the Global Cyber Expertise magazine. Here it is. We will go into a break, and outside you will get a copy of this one. It has a lot of good articles on cyber capacity building, so please enjoy it. And if you have examples for yourself, just contact us, then you can also be part of this magazine. Thank you.